Chapter 91, Stealing Treasure. Chapter 91, Stealing Treasure. While that dwarf was immensely satisfied with himself, Han Li was scheming in his mind. Two men quickly jumped out from the Seven Mysteries Sect side. After they jumped from the crowd, without saying anything, they rushed straight toward the dwarf as quick as lightning. They were Wang Juchu's two remaining martial uncles. These two men wore grieving expressions. It was obvious that the tall and sturdy man's death had greatly saddened them. As a result, they felt endless loathing for Monk Golden Light and paid no attention to his sword's transcendent movements. They were consumed by the thirst to kill the opponent and take revenge on behalf of their fallen comrade. Sect leader Wang had originally planned to block their reckless actions, but acknowledged that this dwarf, capable of mystic techniques, had to be confronted sooner or later. These two martial uncles were the only ones capable of threatening the dwarf. Rather than blocking them now, it would be better to take advantage of his martial uncles' desire for revenge and have them clash with the dwarf immediately. Thinking of this, Wang Juchu swallowed the words that he was about to say to call them back. Monk Golden Light had learned his lesson not long ago and did not dare to look down on these opponents. He propelled the gray light toward the two with one finger. The gray light immediately changed into a long beam of light and flew directly towards them. The uncle who resembled a scholar immediately suspected that the flying sword's gray light would fly toward them. He raised an eyebrow and raised his hand, launching a thin silver line from his sleeve. It collided against the gray streak of light head-on, stopping it for a second. However, the gray streak of light then rushed forward, as if nothing had happened. It seemed that the silver line did not have much of an effect. The others could not clearly discern the nature of the silver line, but with the extreme eyesight bestowed upon him by the Eternal Spring Arts, Han Li was able to see it very clearly. It consisted of tens of silver needles fired off in succession in a straight line. However, he did not know what method the scholar had used. Such a powerful technique, capable of violently launching out many thin, feather-like needles, had greatly interested Han Li. Seeing that the silver needles had no effect, the scholar did not panic and instead began revolving his body like a spinning top. Immediately after, his revolving silhouette ejected countless cold beams of light varying in size that split into two parts. One portion turned into a silver stream that directly struck the gray light, producing a sharp crackling sound as they hit each other. Unfortunately, it was unable to destroy the gray streak of light. The other portion flew straight towards the dwarf, colliding against the golden barrier. Ding ding! The impact itself was a spectacular sight. The gray streak of light launched itself against the silver stream, causing an unending amount of debris fragments to fall. Because they were completely shattered, one could no longer make out their original appearance, but the objects that ricocheted off the golden barrier were intact, only taking minimal damage. These objects formed the silver stream and consisted of a few throwing knives, prayer beads, iron lotus seeds, metal coins, and a myriad of concealed weapons. There were even a few unfamiliar items that could not be named. Monk Golden Light was slightly surprised. However, he immediately curled his lips and thought that these mundane, common metal weapons could not possibly fend off his treasure for long. Tai, a huge shout like that of spring thunder resonated through the arena, shocking everyone present and leaving them in awe. At this moment, everyone discovered that the gray-clothed man, who had originally rushed out alongside the scholar, had drawn the precious sword from his back at an unknown moment and was steadily walking toward the gray light. About 2 inches of light emanated from the tip of the sword that he was holding. The light continuously grew and shrank, giving off a menacingly cold air. Sword point. It was unknown who had first shouted the name of this supreme sword skill that every swordsman would yearn for, even in their dreams. Suddenly, there was an explosion. Passion flared both from inside and outside the stage. If one were to say flying swords were but a rumor from legend, then sword point would be a legend of Jianghu that all swordmen would yearn for. Currently, not only did sword point and flying swords appear in succession, but also their immediate confrontation. How could anyone not burn with anger at being unable to witness such a scene? This was a moment that could make life feel worthwhile. At this moment, however, Jia Tianlong was not excited with the crowd. Instead, those around him felt a cold aura being released as he felt the flow of cold sweat. Only now did he understand what it felt like to be terrified in hindsight. Although he previously knew the Seven Mysteries Sect was hiding 3 great experts, he did not anticipate that this expert would have a great enough skill that he would be able to use sword point. Had he not requested this monk Golden Light to act, Jia Tianlong feared that this gray-clothed person, capable of using sword point, could kill each and every person on his side. While Jia Tianlong's frightened expression paled, The gray-clothed man had already arrived below the gray streak of light. At this moment, it was unknown whether the scholar had exhausted his supply of hidden weapons or the scholar had deliberately stopped, but the scholar's bodily rotation halted all of a sudden, breaking the silver stream that was pushing against the gray light. No longer facing any resistance, the gray light naturally fell towards the head of the gray-clothed man. The gray-clothed man grasped his sword with both hands and fearlessly leaped high into the air. He waved the point of his sword and ferociously struck the gray light. A clear dang sound spread through the air. The gray-clothed man fell to the ground from midair and staggered back several steps. Soon after, he opened his mouth and spouted out a mouthful of blood, his expression becoming dispirited and listless. The first 3 inches of the longsword in his hand had disappeared and turned into a flat bulge. The gray streak suffered through this strike like a shot bird and fell from the sky. Even after landing in the dust, the gray light's brilliance did not wane. Instead, it continued pulsing incessantly, appearing intact and completely vigorous. Seeing this event, both crowds simultaneously cried out in surprise. However, the members of the Seven Mysteries Sect's cries were brimming with joy, while Giant Tianlong's side was brimming with worry. The scholar was also elated, but he hesitated for a moment as he looked at the winded gray-clothed man and the eyes of the dwarf. Nevertheless, his body flew towards the dwarf, preparing to dispatch the enemy. Without waiting for the scholar to fly out even a few steps, the gray-clothed man suddenly yelled from behind, "Quick dodge!" The scholar's mind was startled, but he immediately began to move. However, he felt a cool sensation from his neck and saw the gray light fly past him. He witnessed a headless body run forward a few steps that soon fell to the floor. The back of that body seemed exceedingly familiar. As the scholar thought of this, his consciousness quickly faded. Monk Golden Light was completely arrogant at this moment. He once again commanded the gray light on the ground to suddenly rise and fly towards the gray-clothed man, the sole survivor of the 3 experts. He was immensely proud of the small scheme he used to get rid of the scholar. Just as he planned to immediately kill what was left of the Seven Mysteries Sect after killing this gray-clothed man, he suddenly heard a sentence from a figure within the crowd. "This thing of yours flying about, I've grown fond of it. How about you give it to me and let me play with it?" Just as he heard this, he felt a formidable spiritual power approach his gray light and forcibly sever his connection with it, snatching it away from his control. The gray light that was originally flying toward the gray-clothed man turned in midair and flew into the crowd. Wherever the gray light went, people lost their heads in fear and were dodging it all over the place. Only a common-looking youth of only 17 to 18 years stood unmoving from his original spot. This youth smiled toward Monk Golden Light for a moment, exposing his pure white teeth that contrasted against his tan skin. He then pointed to the gray light, which obediently fell into his hand. An immortal cultivator. The dwarf's heart trembled and his complexion fell, becoming pale beyond comparison. Chapter 92, Sword Talisman. Chapter 92, Sword Talisman. Everyone who had seen this young man's actions all thought that their eyes must have failed them. Originally, when they saw the gray light turn and fly towards the crowd from the Seven Mysteries Sect, they believed the midget had changed his mind, intending to first kill off the rest of the humble martial art disciples and then handle the gray-clothed person. Who would have imagined that the gray streak would fly into the crowd and actually land on the hand of a seemingly ordinary disciple who effortlessly received it? This was far too much to believe. The Seven Mysteries Sect's side, including sect leader Wang and the gray-clothed man, felt both pleasantly surprised and relieved from the unexpected rescue. Wang Juchu was in ecstasy and was even more glad that he had the foresight to agree to let Han Li participate in the deathmatch. He knew that the survival of the participants in the deathmatch, as well as the survival of the Seven Mysteries Sect, would henceforth depend entirely on this profoundly mysterious Dr. Han Li. Li Feiyu had understood what Han Li had stolen. At this moment, his mouth had dropped open and did not close for a while. Although he knew his close friend was somewhat outstanding, to be able to take away the immortal cultivator's flying sword was a feat Li Feiyu could only dream of, making him absolutely giddy. This actually went as far as to make Zhang Ziyu, Elder Li, and the opposing Jia Tianlong wide-eyed and speechless. Each of their facial expressions was very wonderful to behold. Numerous gazes were shot out, included fear, doubt, and pleasant surprise, but all of them fell onto Han Li. Han Li had a smooth expression and was smiling all along. It seemed that he did not have even the slightest care for the spectators' attentive gazes. However, no one knew that behind that calm appearance, his mind was filled with endless depression. Only the heavens knew that Han Li absolutely did not want to take action. His original plan was to wait for the dwarf to negligently drop his golden barrier and then mount a sneak attack. Until then, he would conceal himself in the rear and use very small fireballs to easily kill the opposition. But who would have thought that the plan of the heavens would supersede that of men? Han Li, from simply seeing the gray streak fly about, had stirred an uncomfortable irritation and unconsciously used a technique he had learned earlier through endless practice. Telekinesis technique. The result was an easy seizure of the object. Such a simple seizure was greatly unexpected. Han Li simply extended his magic power towards the gray streak and easily erased the dwarf's spiritual power, establishing a connection between him and the gray light. On one hand, Han Li had effortlessly seized control of the opponent's treasure and was secretly delighted. On the other hand, he now had no choice but to confront the dwarf, making him somewhat uneasy. He clearly understood he did not possess enough force to break the opponent's tortoise shell. The only thing giving him comfort was that his magic power had exceeded his opponent's several times over. Of course, the slightest sign of unease could not be seen in Han Li's expression. That was because he was fully aware that if one held the psychological high ground, then they would possess a great advantage in a true confrontation and would somewhat increase the odds of success out of thin air. This was a trick he had learned from within the blinking sword art manuals. As a result, after recognizing the dwarf as a great enemy, Han Li showed the opposite and instead showed an expression of having a card up his sleeve. He leisurely moved the treasure he had just taken back and forth in his hands. The gray streak remained spirited, and its length was indeterminate, its true form still unclear. Han Li raised his head to take a glance at the somewhat pale dwarf and slightly smiled. He lightly rubbed the gray streak in between his hands. The gray streak's brilliance was immediately exhausted, revealing its true appearance. It was actually a Taoist paper talisman. In addition, a picture of a small gray sword was drawn on this peculiar talisman. The small gray sword on the paper talisman was drawn vividly and lifelike, as if it were real. In addition, there was no magic power urging the small sword to move, yet it emitted a faint flowing light on its own, as if it were an exceptionally sharp sword. Its cold aura was menacing. However, he had second thoughts regarding this Taoist talisman. Recalling the previous great display of its outstanding mysterious power, he felt somewhat satisfied. After all, its ferociousness was seen with his own eyes. He was certain it will be quite useful later on. Han Li easily pocketed the talisman in his bosom. He didn't dare to swaggeringly use this item in front of its previous owner. Who knows what tricks the opponent could do with the talisman? In addition, he was quite unfamiliar with the telekinesis technique, having never practiced it on a suitable object. He supposed that if he were to use this object now, it would be very difficult to injure his opponent with it. Across from him, Monk Golden Light stared helplessly as Han Li pocketed the treasure he had taken from him. He could not help but become furious, but he did not have the courage to step forward and tear it away from him. It should be known that, since the opponent was able to easily erase his spiritual power from the talisman, his opponent's magic power should be several times deeper than his own. He truly did not have the courage to contest against him. Han Li saw that the dwarf was strained. Monk Golden Light was clearly angry but did not dare to speak, knowing that he was already subdued by his opponent. Not knowing who was superior, Han Li's nerves couldn't help but want to settle this matter even more. Finally, deciding to be a fox masquerading as a tiger, Han Li exerted the imperial flight technique on his body. His figure flashed several times until he arrived in front of the dwarf. Seeing Han Li move in the way that gods appeared and demons vanished, Monk Golden Light grew even more fearful. He could not help but recoil several steps, timidly saying in a soft voice, "What are you going to do? I'm not conquering this region's resources, nor did I take any spiritual herbs or immortal elixirs. I only received a few of these mortals' gold, nothing more. Furthermore, I didn't violate your local clan's interests. You have no reason to kill me." Hearing these words, Han Li was secretly delighted. He knew the opponent had mistaken him as a representative of some immortal cultivation clan. His confidence suddenly rose a bit. He deliberately gave a faint smile, and soon after, he feigned a mysterious identity and softly asked, "I don't know who your excellency is. Why have you taken the initiative to participate in mortal affairs and disturb the local order of the secular realm? This puts my clan in a difficult position." Hearing the opponent's mind town and thinking that Han Li lacked the intention to dispose of him, the dwarf immediately roused his spirit. His two small eyeballs spun around in several circles, and he hastily said in an evasive manner, "I am a disciple of the Yi clan from the Qinyi mountain range. I was simply passing by. Because I was an old friend of the Feral Wolf Gang's commander, I couldn't resist their plea and decided to help them out. By no means did I have any intention of deliberately offending your clan. Brother, I hope you'll forgive me. What is the name of your noble clan? In the future, this humble man will certainly visit your clan to apologize for this offense. Chapter 93, Raging Flames Burning the Enemy. Chapter 93, Raging Flames Burning the Enemy. After revealing the fact that he was someone from the Yi clan, the dwarf involuntarily puffed out his chest. As if he could draw support from the words he just spoke, the tone of his voice also got more bold. It seemed like he was extremely confident about the fame associated with the name Yi clan from the Qin Yi mountain range. Seeing how courageous the dwarf became all of a sudden, Han Li knew that the Yi clan had to be a famous immortal clan. However, even though the dwarf had such an impressive backing, he had still panicked during the start of the fight and made mistakes that clearly showed that he did not lie. He was just a nobody within the immortal clan. His life or death held no significance to the clan, which would not stir even if he perished. Han Li made his judgment within a few short moments. In his heart, he had already decided to finish off his opponent, since he knew that there wouldn't be any future repercussions. This deduction destroyed the last thread of sympathy within Han Li, whose heart began to surge increasingly with a strong murderous intent. After all, his opponent's magic power could not be compared to Han Li's. Even the dwarf's movements and actions were that of an idiot, despite the dwarf being an immortal cultivator. However, how rare was it to find an immortal cultivator here? Even if there were no conditions of a deathmatch, Han Li would not give up this chance and reject this big gift. In addition, Han Li could easily deduce that the dwarf was not a kind-hearted being based on his mannerisms and speech. Thus, when Han Li moved into action, he did not have the slightest hesitation. Qin yelling, Yi clan. Could it be he's from that famous clan? Surprise appeared on Han Li's face as if he believed the dwarf's words. Since his opponent dared to use this name to intimidate him, Han Li silently guessed that this clan should be quite famous among immortal cultivators. It's exactly that Yi clan. Brother, you've actually heard of the Yi clan, so I believe you won't purposely make things difficult for me. Seeing how the great name of the Yi clan affected Han Li, the dwarf started to boast and speak in a loud voice. Yi clan. Han Li pretended to hesitate as he scratched his head, displaying an expression of contemplation. Upon seeing this situation, joy bloomed in that dwarf's heart. He immediately rushed to the side and frenziedly hit the drum, creating a cacophony of noise. He was extremely afraid that the situation would turn out disadvantageous for him if this dragged on. How about this? I will bring you to see one of the clan's elders and will let the upper management decide how we should deal with this. How about it, brother? Han Li replied as if he was being put into a difficult position. No need for such troubles. This is just a small matter. If you want the elders to get involved in such a small affair, I'm afraid it would leave a bad impression in the eyes of the elder and would be greatly detrimental to your future progress. The moment the dwarf heard Han Li's reply, he couldn't help but jump in shock. He hurriedly put on a caring face, trying to dissuade Han Li. Monk Golden Light saw Han Li as an inexperienced young immortal cultivator who was traveling to gain worldly experience. He thought that Han Li had always been trapped inside his clan and made to cultivate. The only possible explanation for Han Li's youthful age and his profound magic power was that he had only recently come out to the secular world. Thank you, brother, for your reminder. Han Li appeared very touched, lowering his head as he pondered. Extending his arms, he took out the talisman with the picture of a small sword etched over it. This is the first time I met you, but brother has already shown such great care for me. I think I shall return this treasure to you, its original owner. Deceptively, Han Li spoke in a sincere tone, although there were some lingering traces of unwillingness in his expression. The dwarf was extremely happy. To think that the immortal cultivator in front of him was so naive that he would want to return the treasure that the dwarf had just lost. Afraid that any hesitation would cause Han Li to change his mind, the dwarf stopped thinking further about it and hurriedly decided. As he waved his hands, the golden barrier around him dissolved completely. He extended his hand to get back his talisman and rudely said, "Since brother is so sincere, I will no longer be polite." Seeing the dwarf had extended his hand in an attempt to grab the talisman, Han Li's expression abruptly underwent a huge change. He pointed to the back of the dwarf and excitedly called out, "Clan leader, why has this esteemed elder arrived at this place?" Upon hearing this, the dwarf froze, so frightened that he no longer cared about the treasure. He turned his head around, but there was no one there, only silence. OSH \T. No matter how stupid the dwarf was, he knew that he had fallen for Han Li's trap. Hurriedly turning back his head, he could only feel a hot sensation near his chest. Soon after, flames started rising up his body, covering him in a sea of flames. In the blink of an eye, the dwarf was incinerated into ashes. After this moment, Han Li let out a long sigh and retracted the hand that he had used to shoot out the fireball earlier. Using the small fireball technique and killing his opponent with a single move, the whole process seemed extremely simple, but he had actually expended a great deal of effort under a lot of pressure in order to come up with this plan. Now that his sneak attack had succeeded, a joyful smile broke out on his face, and he praised himself silently. Jia Tianlong and Wang Juchu had clearly seen what happened just now, but they did not understand what they saw. Because neither Han Li nor the dwarf was willing to let others listen in to their conversation, they had spoken in extremely low tones. The spectators were too far away, and thus were unable to hear their voices. They only knew that upon seeing Han Li, the dwarf got extremely afraid, but after exchanging a few sentences, the dwarf appeared to be sincerely begging Han Li for something. During the final moments, they saw that when the dwarf's back was turned, Han Li had abruptly unleashed a fireball and incinerated the feral wolf gang's backer, easily disintegrating him into a layer of white dust. Jia Tianlong felt a bitter taste in his mouth, so bitter that it seeped deep into his heart. How could this have happened? Originally, the outcome was in their favor, but why did it end up like this? After this unremarkable disciple of the Seven Mysteries Sect appeared, everything was suddenly turned upside down. Even Monk Golden Light, an immortal cultivator, was burned to a state where he couldn't be any more than dead. On the other hand, Wang Juchu's emotions were naturally opposite from that of his great enemy. He tightly gripped to the hilt of his long sword that was placed on his waist, and was looking over with an excited expression. Squatting in an ungraceful posture, he looked at Han Li, who easily swept away the dwarf, while showing a fervent expression on his face. The current Han Li was very excited. However, this was not just excitement from winning against the dwarf. From Monk Golden Light's ashes, he discovered a few items that had not been burned into ashes. There weren't many items, only a talisman, a command medallion, and a book. The talisman was the one that the dwarf had used to erect the golden barrier. Although Han Li did not know the incantation, it was still sufficient enough to drive him wild with joy. Currently, the thing that he needed most of all was a protective measure that could be used to save his life. The command medallion was a black, triangular shape object. On one side there were golden words carved upon it, Immortal Ascension, while on the other side the word command was engraved in silver. The entire command medallion didn't seem to be made from metal, but it was heavy and solid to the touch. Han Li had no idea what it could be used for. And as for that book, Han Li knew that this had to be some extraordinary object, given the fact that it wasn't burned into a crisp after he unleashed his fireball technique. But after flipping through a few pages, he realized that this book was actually a genealogical record of some sort, a record of those that were surnamed Qin. Han Li did not know what this had to do with Monk Golden Light, nor why it was so important that the dwarf carried it in his possession. This dwarf said that he was a disciple from the Yi clan, but he brought along a genealogical record of those who were surnamed Qin. Could he be a bastard child of the Yi clan? Greatly disappointed, Han Li made a few malicious guesses. Chapter 94, Complete Victory. Chapter 94, Complete Victory. Although he had obtained these three items, he was not capable of immediately using any of them. However, Han Li still collected them without a trace of politeness. Han Li then stood up and brushed off the dust on his body. Using a smile that wasn't truly a smile, he looked toward Jia Tianlong and the rest of the feral wolf gang. Do you intend to break your own meridians, or would you rather have me personally send you off? Han Li's tone was very polite, but the meaning of his words did not give the feral wolf gang the slightest amount of leeway. Hearing these words, Jia Tianlong felt an extraordinary cold feeling permeating through his body and freezing his entire face. He constantly warned himself to remain calm and that there would be a method to deal with this man. However, he could not help but wipe his forehead that was covered by a layer of cold sweat. Jia Tianlong forced a bitter smile, knowing that he didn't need a mirror to know that his current complexion was, without a doubt, extremely unsightly. With great effort, he turned his head around to look at everyone from the feral wolf gang, only to find that the complexions of his men were also pale. All of them were frightened and wore expressions that foretold the imminent arrival of a great catastrophe. These people were at a loss, not knowing what to do. The slightest will to fight could not be seen in their panic-stricken eyes. Jia Tianlong was dispirited. Facing the Seven Mysteries Sect, he looked at his archenemy, Wang Juchu, who was coldly gazing back with a look that could kill. For the most part, the rest of the crowd had hateful expressions and a thirst for revenge. Jia Tianlong was at a loss. As he unconsciously looked outside of the deathmatch arena, his gaze fell upon his originally loyal and devout subordinates. The previous feelings that they had had and what their expressions currently expressed had nothing in common with each other. There were some who were anxious and others who were aloof, but the majority of them had unexpectedly cheerful expressions. They were all whispering in each other's ears, evidently feeling pleasure from Jia Tianlong's misfortune. "This will not do. We ourselves will decide whether or not we will die here. We will survive and continue to complete our hegemony." It was unknown whose expression it was that touched Jia Tianlong's nerve, but frenzy suddenly flashed through his eyes. "Men, come. Iron Guards, advance and prepare your crossbows. The rest of you wait for your orders." All of a sudden, Jia Tianlong loudly bellowed with a great amount of inner strength. Jia Tianlong was worthy of being a commander. Even though the men participating in the deathmatch were previously at their wits' end, his roar that contained inner strength roused all their spirits, making the men seem as if they had just woken from a dream. Regardless of whether they were from the feral wolf gang or just experts of a small faction, they all had a pillar of support. One after another, they wiped their fists and rubbed their palms, adopting a determination to fight to the death. Han Li slightly wrinkled his eyebrow and gave a light snort. With his hands behind his back, he slowly walked towards Jia Tianlong. "It seems like I still have to waste a few more movements," Han Li thought while laughing to himself. "Fire the crossbows." Seeing his opponent enter into range, Jia Tianlong licked his dry lips and gave the order without hesitation. Immediately, hundreds of green steel crossbow bolts fiercely shot toward Han Li. They formed a large mass in front of Han Li, preventing even the wind and rain from passing through. An astonishing scene occurred. When Jia Tianlong saw the Han Li across from him face the oncoming crossbow bolts, the youth did not have the slightest amount of fear. Instead, he gave Jia Tianlong a strange smile before his body began to blur. Those approaching crossbow bolts passed through Han Li's figure without the slightest obstruction and flew off into the distance. In that split second, it was as if his body was incorporeal. Soon after, underneath the full light of day, his body shook several times and disappeared without a trace. Jia Tianlong's complexion ashened. Just as he instructed his subordinates to be careful, Han Li had suddenly appeared only a few dozen steps away from them. Without waiting for Jia Tianlong to give the order, the Iron Guards disorderly shot out arrows from their crossbows once more. This time, the bolts were followed by flying knives, sleeve-sprung bolts, and a number of other hidden weapons. Combined, they were like a swarm of bees shooting towards Han Li. The attack made these people look at each other in dismay. Their opponent was no longer in their sight, having disappeared without a trace. Just as Jia Tianlong became alarmed, he suddenly heard two miserable shrieks from behind him. He was taken aback and immediately turned around. He saw two Iron Guards near him turn into human fireballs. He also saw that the youth who had earlier disappeared now had his palms pressed against the guards' bodies. In the instant his palm left their bodies, the two Iron Guards had already turned to ash. As the youth's palms parted, Jia Tianlong faintly saw a flickering red light from the center of his hand, but he didn't know what astonishing technique Han Li had used. What Jia Tianlong saw was a demonstration of magic techniques and martial arts being perfectly used simultaneously. A red light glowed from both of his hands. Each glowing light was a small fireball from the fireball technique. Han Li slowly circulated magic power through his body, returning the small fireballs to their original size. Then, his figure disappeared once more and immediately reappeared at other end of the crowd. Once again, another feral wolf gang member was turned into a raging fireball. In this manner, Han Li intermittently disappeared and reappeared within the crowd. Each time he appeared, there was a victim. Regardless of where he touched the victim with his hand, that person would immediately combust and thoroughly disappear from the world. Jia Tianlong blankly looked ahead with eyes that lacked even the slightest spirit. His complexion turned ash-gray, like that of a corpse. In that short moment, more than half had died under Han Li's hand. Those remaining felt insecure, and one after another, they began to flee in every direction. However, in the face of the opponent's ghost-like body technique, these people were reduced to ash, one after another. By the time he was down to his last subordinate, Jia Tianlong's fiery spirit was already smothered. The commander of the feral wolf gang had become completely numb. He knew that the fact that he was not touched by Han Li up until now was a meaningless facade, deliberately upheld by his opponent. However, He was the only one remaining now, so he reckoned that the deadly fire would eventually descend onto his own head soon. Han Li did not let Commander Jia Tianlong wait any longer. After he got rid of the commander's last subordinate, Han Li did not hesitate and immediately flashed behind Jia Tianlong. Han Li gave Jia Tianlong preferential treatment by sending him off with a complete fireball. After the great Jia Tianlong was delivered to the next world, Han Li clapped his hands and softly said to himself, "It seems that killing this many people is not too difficult of a matter. I told you earlier to settle it yourselves. That would have been much better. There would have been less suffering as well, but you made me settle this personally. The feeling of being on fire must have certainly been unpleasant." TL, delivered to the next world. Chinese letter in Chinese literally means return west. This is a euphemism for dying, but it implies that a person has returned to the Western paradise, a reference to Buddhism. Chapter 95, Demonic Name, Resounding Famously. Chapter 95, Demonic Name Resounding Famously. Han Li raised his head and stared at the arena. Regardless of whether they were members of the Seven Mysteries Sect or the Feral Wolf Gang, all of them had no hint of color on their faces as they stared at each other with expressions of dread and fear. Whether it was retrieving the flying sword, killing Monk Goldenlight, or instantly turning Jia Tianlong's 10 bodyguards into ashes, all of these actions indicated that not only was Han Li an immortal cultivator like Monk Goldenlight, but he also lacked kindness or mercy. His methods were even more cold-blooded and ruthless than that of Monk Goldenlight. Thus, wherever his gaze landed, the people in the direction of his glare would lower their heads and hide. Nobody dared to meet his gaze. The current Han Li was capable of invoking fear into everyone. "Still not getting lost? Could it be that you want to stay on the mountain and have me send you off?" Han Li coldly said in the direction of the Feral Wolf Gang members. The sound of his voice could not be considered loud, but the thousands of people currently at the mountain summit could hear him clearly, causing them to be terrified by his voice. "Quick, let's escape. If we linger here, he will burn us to death," an unknown person shouted. Simultaneously, the Feral Wolf Gang and the rest of the invaders from the smaller sects instantly became chaotic as they pushed one another, trying to be the first to run off the mountains. The stream of people rushing down caused the small mountain path to be extremely crowded. Along the way, many of them were grievously injured and even trampled to death. Shortly after, the setting sun summit was emptied. Other than the members from the Seven Mysteries Sect, there was no one else. Wang Juchu was astonished and elated. Never would he have thought that the danger his sect faced would be so easily averted, or that Jia Tianlong would be destroyed so forcefully. However, there were also traces of uneasiness in his heart despite his happiness. He knew that since Han Li could easily avert their disaster, he could also pressure the Seven Mysteries Sect with ease or even destroy it, causing them to become the current Feral Wolf Gang. As sect leader Wang thought of this, traces of worry once again appeared in his initially relaxed heart. Involuntarily, his gaze shifted to the center of the arena. "AI, where's Dr. Han?" The shocked sect leader Wang drew in a sharp breath. Earlier, that indeterminable expert, Han Li, had disappeared without a trace. "Did anyone see Dr. Han?" Wang Juchu hurriedly asked. "No idea. Didn't notice." Though almost everyone in the crowd had no idea where Han Li went, but this was only to be expected. After all, their attention had been fixed on the method that Han Li used to burn his opponents. Who would dare to turn their gaze from that inhumane monster? Because of his ghostly body movements, if Han Li didn't want them to track his movements, it would be extremely simple to achieve. "There's no need to look for him anymore. I saw that he had mixed himself with the crowd and has already departed from Setting Sun Summit." Many gray-robed men opened their mouths and asserted this once their countenance recovered. "Already left? Where was he going?" Sect leader Wang had a complicated look on his face. He bitterly smiled, murmuring to himself. As he contemplated his surroundings, his gaze landed on to a certain corpse. Wang Juchu's eyes suddenly shined with a bright light as his lips curled into a smile, revealing the look of a crafty old cheater. At this moment, an incomparably excited Li Feiyu talking to Zhang Ziyu. Because his good friend suddenly exposed himself as a powerful expert, Li Feiyu didn't notice that he became the focus of someone's attention. Just like this, the Feral Wolf Gang and the rest of the invaders retreated rapidly out of the Celestial Rainbow Mountains. They abused their horses, rushing through the night, in order to quickly leave the Seven Mysteries Sect's territory. Because the power of the Seven Mysteries Sect's upper echelon had been severely damaged, sect leader Wang did not send men to pursue the retreating invaders. That day was an extremely long day. Once the day had passed, both the Feral Wolf Gang and the Seven Mysteries Sect laid down their flags and ceased their drum beats, entering a ceasefire to recuperate from their losses. This time around, the battle between both parties was a fight with many twists and turns. Before long, word spread of a legendary immortal, as well as a demonic figure. This legendary tale caused members of both good and evil sects to discuss this topic relentlessly, transforming the story into one that would echo endlessly through multiple generations. In the story, the great battle began with a supreme sword wielder, capable of unleashing sword beams from his sword, fighting against a sword immortal that could fly by stepping on his flying sword. In the end, the sword immortal's flying sword techniques were too mysterious, even mightier than the sword beams, and thus the sword immortal easily defeated the supreme sword user. Making use of this opportunity, a fiery demon suddenly appeared and killed the sword immortal right after the supreme sword user and the sword immortal had injured each other. The demon also went berserk, invoking his flames to kill over 1,000 spectators. One of the casualties was the unlucky Jia Tianlong, commander of the Feral Wolf Gang. He died without a corpse, disintegrating into dust. At the border of God Hand Valley, Han Li heard the story in which he became a fiery demon from Li Feiyu's mouth. He stood his ground in shock, speechless. Meanwhile, Li Feiyu was cracking up and bending over in laughter to such an extent that he couldn't even straighten his back after half a day. It was noontime, the 5th day after the deathmatch. That night, Han Li silently hid himself within the crowd and left Setting Sun Summit. Once he found Crooked Soul, they returned back to God Hand Valley. Once he was back, he hung a sign that stated that he would refuse to meet with anyone, even the Seven Mysteries Sect's highest authority, because of seclusion training. Naturally, because of the fame behind Han Li's name, the top-level figures did not dare to show any sense of dissatisfaction, nor did they dare to intrude God Hand Valley without an invitation. They could only wait obediently outside the valley for a period of time, and sigh as they returned back the way they came. During the following days, Han Li began using the dwarf's sword talisman to practice the telekinesis technique. Because he knew that he didn't have much time left, he would practice his telekinesis technique even before the sun rose. Every day, he made the glowing talisman soar through the valley and fly unhindered in a dance until his energy was depleted. Afterward, he would close his eyes to replenish his energy before resuming his practice. In this manner, Han Li repeatedly persisted his dry and dull training that lasted for 3 days, until he had fully mastered the initial stage of the telekinesis technique. Chapter 96 Flaw. While practicing his control over the talisman's flight, Han Li discovered that using the telekinesis technique to propel the talisman would turn it into a gray streak of light. Although it was incomparably sharp, there were some major limitations when it was put into full use, even though it could cut through nearly everything and attacked according to his will. First of all, propelling this gray light cost too much magic power. Once Han Li cultivated to the 8th layer of Eternal Spring Arts, he could continuously use Fireball technique 100 times. However, when controlling the gray light, his magic power could only persist for a short quarter of an hour before it was completely exhausted. He currently remembered that earlier Monk Golden Light had not immediately made use of the gray streak. His magic power was far too limited and could only control the talisman for a pitiful amount of time. This explained why he had put up such weak resistance when Han Li seized the gray streak. While the dwarf was controlling the gray streak, the dwarf had probably expended more than half of his magic power. In addition, Han Li's magic power was originally far greater than that of the dwarf's. When contesting in magic power with the dwarf, it was natural for the dwarf to be completely and utterly defeated. In addition, another problem with the gray streak was that its attacking distance was quite limited. The gray streak could only be easily controlled within a radius of about 70 meters. Outside of this range, his control would become rigid and sluggish. Occasionally, he would lose control. When flying outside the range of about 100 meters, the gray streak would completely change back to its true form as a talisman and drop to the ground. With regards to those two flaws, Han Li believed that once his magic power advanced, those problems would gradually be alleviated. However, there was one last problem, the talisman's fatal flaw. After using the talisman several times, Han Li became aware that the cold light emitted from drawing of the small gray sword slowly grew weaker the more he used it. It seemed that its lifespan was gradually reduced. In other words, this talisman had a limited number of uses. When the number of times it could be used passed the limit, it would be completely exhausted and die a ripe death. Once Han Li had somewhat learned to control this gray light, he immediately stopped practicing. After all, he wanted to be able to use this talisman during a crucial moment of dangerous situations. Perhaps in a later crisis, this item would be able to save his tiny life. In the same way, Han Li believed that the golden talisman that could transform into a golden barrier also had a similar restriction. However, for the time being, he didn't know the incantation to use it. He could only store it away and prepare it for future use. After Han Li had rested, he investigated the triangular command medallion and the Qin clan's manual. Unfortunately, he gained nothing from these objects. 5 days passed in this manner. The moment when Han Li removed the sign saying that he would not see others, Li Feiyu rushed in like a fart. When he saw Han Li, he told him about the rumor of him turning into a demon. These rumors left Han Li speechless, not knowing whether to laugh or to cry. He could only harden his face and give Li Feiyu an unhappy look. Li Feiyu was obviously making fun of him. Li Feiyu finally stopped laughing heartily and slowly restrained his smile. He said to Han Li with a solemn voice, "You should be able to guess the reason why I came here. Is it not because the sect's many elders did not feel at ease with me and sent you to scout out my attitude?" Han Li dully replied with indifference. As long as you know." As if he were burdened by the elder's great trust, Li Feiyu let out a sigh. "However, what do you plan to have me, your close friend, report back to those fellows? In order to bribe me, they have already promised to promote me from my position as the External Blade Division's division head." Li Feiyu immediately smiled mischievously once more. Han Li wrinkled his brows. After thinking about it, he gently said, "It seems that the great sect leader Wang and those previously mentioned elders are uneasy. Let's clear up this matter, otherwise they won't be able to feel relieved. Then it will be like this. Return and tell sect leader Wang that at noon tomorrow I will personally go to Setting Sun Summit to see him. Let him know that he does not need to be uneasy," Han Li said with a smile. "Good, with these words I can report back." Li Feiyu shrugged his shoulders with a noncommittal answer. After that, Han Li and Li Feiyu wildly chatted for a moment. It had even gone as far as Han Li showing Li Feiyu the fireball technique at close range, greatly opening Li Feiyu's perspective and leaving him envious for the rest of the day. This continued for a short while more before Li Feiyu took his leave and left the valley to report back to Wang Juchu. Han Li stood at the room's doorway and gazed at Li Feiyu's departing figure from a distance, lost in thought for a long time. He suddenly smiled mysteriously and entered the room, closing the door behind him. The next morning, as the sky grew brighter, Han Li climbed Setting Sun Summit with the utmost secrecy. He continued stealthily until he had entered sect leader Wang's room. When Wang Juchu woke up, he saw the silhouette of a person standing upright next to his bed. His complexion became unsightly, but he managed to squeeze out a stiff smile. Somewhat unnaturally, he asked, "Dr. Han Li, why did you come? I hope you'll forgive me for not welcoming you. But didn't we agree to meet at noon? Why has your venerable self come so early?" Han Li coldly glanced at sect leader Wang. This glance made all the hairs on Wang Juchu's body stand on end. Sect leader Wang's face was as if had he suffered the pain from being cut with a knife. Seeing Wang Juchu look frightened, Han Li could not help but be secretly pleased with himself. He looked at Wang Juchu after executing the Heaven's Eye technique, giving himself some particular effects. A few days ago, his research discovered a new use for the Heaven's Eye technique. He could use the Heaven's Eye to cause the spirits of ordinary mortals to be in awe. "There is no reason. I simply felt that if I were to come earlier, everyone's minds might be a bit more clear-headed. That way, they wouldn't force any unpleasant affairs upon the other party." The slightest expression could not be discerned from Han Li's face, although his tone seemed somewhat ill-intentioned. Chapter 97, Backhand Transaction. Chapter 97, Backhand Transaction. As soon as sect leader Wang heard this, his heart could not help but thump like a drum. Yesterday, he and the other elders had received Han Li's message from Li Feiyu that he would come to Setting Sun Summit tomorrow at noon. Some of these people had immediately felt that Han Li was far too dangerous and lost their reason, proposing during the meeting to take action and seize the opportunity to kill Han Li. However, this proposition suffered great opposition from a different group. They recognized that such actions were far too dangerous and that they were likely to suffer great retribution if they failed. Those wanting to take action immediately divulged rumors for quite a while, and dreamed up many justifications during the night for the purpose of intense refutation. Actually, all of these people were well aware that the accusation that Han Li was far too dangerous was all but just a pretense. There were some people that were envious of his cultivation technique and had planned to conspire against him in order to reap gains from Dr. Han Li. Perhaps even those who opposed the accusations possessed similar intentions. It was just that they would use milder and more covert methods compared to the people who outright conspired against Han Li. In sect leader Wang's presence, both of these groups quarreled with anger and excitement. From the beginning of each meeting to its quick dispersion, no side had truly convinced the other. Instead, they continued to argue garrulously. Finally, when the surviving martial uncle, the gray-clothed man, saw that the conflict showed no signs of settling down, he coldly said a few words to immediately calm everyone down. "Could it be you aren't afraid of his elders coming to find him after he's killed?" The gray-clothed man's words were like a bucket of cold water, immediately sobering the elders' feverish minds. That's right, Han Li is so young, but he's already this ferocious. He must definitely have an immortal-class elder behind him. Even if we cover up the nature of his death when his elders come, wouldn't everyone here die a tragic death? When they understood that killing Dr. Han would be equivalent to killing themselves, those who originally advocated an attempt to poison Han Li had completely changed their minds. However, one or two of them were still blinded by greed and persisted, though they now suggested more moderate methods to deal with Han Li instead. Sect leader Wang had just heard Han Li speak some profound words. He felt somewhat guilty and believed that Han Li possessed great magic power. Because Wang Juchu did not know how Han Li had learned the details of the dispute that occurred the day before, he grew even more cautious. However, Wang Juchu had been a sect leader for many years, so his experience and shrewdness were extraordinary. He quickly broke away from the effect of the Heaven Eyes technique and regained his normal expression. "Medicinal god Han Li, why do you say these words? This entire sect couldn't possibly thank your venerable self enough." After Wang Juchu had examined the situation, he decided to explore the meaning behind Han Li's words. "Then why did I hear that there were people who wanted to harm me?" Han Li stated in a dull tone while laughing grimly. As sect leader Wang heard this, he was initially frightened, but after looking for signs of anger from Han Li, he soon calmed down slightly. Since Han Li did not speak with an angry tone and had come to see him by himself, he may have simply heard a few rumors without knowing specific details. It seemed that Wang Juchu still had some leeway to repair the relationship between Han Li and the Seven Mysteries Sect. Medicinal god Han Li might have misunderstood. Yesterday, a few degenerates had indeed appeared in the sect in an attempt to forget favors and violate justice. However, please be relieved. These people have long been captured and are under strict observation. The great majority of the sect are nevertheless grateful towards you, Dr. Han. We absolutely wouldn't take actions that would harm our friends and benefit our enemies. After pondering for a moment, Wang Juchu spoke those words with an awe-inspiring righteousness. Hearing this, Han Li grimly laughed in his heart. Ever since he had revealed his strength and assisted the Seven Mysteries Sect through this calamity, he had reminded himself to be careful of the proverbs, "The birds are gone, the bow is put away," and to destroy the bridge after crossing the river. He did not believe that the others would have kindness and be thankful towards him, but the hearts of men were truly hard to fathom. He resigned himself to the words that the great men have once said. So long as there were benefits, forgetting favors to violate justice and not recognizing one's family were no less common than drinking water. This was also one of the reasons why he had refused to meet with the conspirators after Han Li had returned to the valley. He had deliberately made these elders cool their heads. Otherwise, the torch of greed would completely burn away their reason. Although he had told Li Feiyu to deliver a message that he would meet with the elders, Han Li did not plan to meet them on schedule. Even though his current strength was far greater than that of an ordinary expert from Jianghu, if the elders were to use a few shameful methods, there would be far too many methods capable of killing him. As a result, he intentionally arrived half a day earlier for the sake of his safety, stealthily meeting with sect leader Wang by himself. Just now, he had merely probed Wang Juchu a little. This great sect leader Wang had revealed all that he originally wished to conceal. It seemed that these Seven Mysteries Sect elders had truly thought over such matters and wanted to act against him. However, this did not matter, regardless of whether the other party truly wanted to act against him or were just contemplating about it. They would not elicit any anger from him. By the time he finished his business with the #1 figure in the Seven Mysteries Sect, he would have already gone far away. Thus, he would no longer have any relations with them. After looking at Wang Juchu for a moment, he mysteriously said, "I won't speak any more nonsense. I won't hide this from you, sect leader Wang. After this meeting between your venerable self and I will depart from this place and travel to a faraway land. It is very likely that I will not return to the celestial Rainbow Mountains. Before I leave, I wish to make a deal with sect leader that would be beneficial to both parties." A deal? Hearing that Han Li would leave, sect leader Wang was stunned. However, after hearing that he wanted to make a deal with him, he was even more bewildered. What kind of deal can I do for medicinal god Han? He could not help but be somewhat perturbed. When noon arrived, Han Li did not appear at Setting Sun Summit Sect Hall at the time he had originally set. Instead, sect leader Wang arrived to the meeting place last, trembling with excitement. The great sect leader Wang proclaimed on the spot that they did not need to wait for Han Li because Han Li had already left the celestial Rainbow Mountains. He did not know where he went, but he guessed that Han Li had departed the Jing province and even state of Yue. As a result, all their troubles had already faded away. When those who were present heard these words, they all widely opened their eyes and looked at each other in shock. The entire meeting room was absolutely silent. He isn't here anymore. Then haven't our plans turned to bullshit? Why did he leave? These people had helpless thoughts circulating in their heads. TLN. The birds are over, the bow is put away, to get rid of someone once he has served his purpose. To destroy the bridge after crossing the river. To abandon one's benefactor upon achieving one's goal. To forget favors and violate justice. To kick a benefactor in the teeth. Not recognizing one's family. To be self-centered and not make any allowances for the needs of a relative. Not long after Han Li had left the celestial Rainbow Mountains, sect leader Wang announced that he had decided to accept Li Feiyu as his successor and had promoted him from division head deputy to division head of the external blade division. From then on, Wang Juchu had placed an immense amount of care and trust on him. Furthermore, Han Li's third uncle would make a careless blunder and break the sect rules in the future several years from now. When he should have been worrying for his life, sect leader Wang had intervened and defended him. And as for sect leader Wang himself, he became grievously injured after facing several formidable enemies in one of the sect's future conflicts and was drawn to the brink of death. But every time the sect members thought that he would finally succumb to his injuries, sect leader Wang would consume a medicinal pill from a jade bottle and somehow miraculously survive. Not only that, but he could also still prance about, full of vitality. This caused others to feel somewhat jealous, and they probed him for details about the origins of the medicine. But of course, Wang Juchu would never divulge the secret, instead murmuring inconsequential words whenever they asked him. Thus, all those who wanted to know his secret returned empty-handed. After Wang Juchu passed away, he left behind a medicinal pill named Vitality Raising Pellet. By this time, there were only 3 pills left inside the jade bottle. These 3 pills caused a storm of blood and brought endless troubles for Wang Juchu's descendants. Nevertheless, these were all events that would take place in the future, so there was no point discussing them right now. As for the current Li Feiyu, he was holding a few bottles in his hand and a paper note. He had just returned back to his residence from Zhang Ziwer's place and discovered several items that suddenly appeared in his house. The paper note was left by Han Li, and the information it contained was very simple. Han Li had left the Seven Mysteries Sect and might never return. The note also mentioned that inside the bottles were medicinal pills that he had painstakingly concocted. They would be able to extend Li Feiyu's lifespan, so Han Li hoped that Li Feiyu wouldn't reject his gift. On the back of the paper, there was an impression of Han Li's smiling face near his signature. Adjacent to the smiling face was a sentence congratulating Li Feiyu and Zhang Ziwer, hoping that they would marry soon and have many babies together. After Li Feiyu recovered from his shock, he ran out of his residence and rushed up a small mountain peak that was close to his home. On the mountain peak, Li Feiyu gazed towards the main gate of the Seven Mysteries Sect, only to see a field of green. He was unable to discover a single silhouette, but he waited motionlessly for half a day before drawing in a huge breath. Trembling as emotion showed on his face, he said in a low voice, "Take care of yourself. I wish you well on your future path." Only then did Li Feiyu slowly descend from the mountain peak. Depression emanated from his lonely back. At this moment, a horse-drawn carriage was trotting on the pathway, heading east. Han Li and Crooked Soul were sitting inside the carriage. Although this four-wheeled carriage was not that cramped, Han Li had spent 3 taels of silver and temporarily rented the vehicle so that only the 2 of them were within the carriage. This wooden carriage appeared worn and tattered on the surface, but the interior was actually extremely clean and tidy. Not only that, the two horses that were pulling the carriage were at the prime of their life, filled with strength and vitality. With vigorous strength, they pulled the carriage along with such swiftness that it could be comparable to flying. It was precisely because Han Li had noticed these two details that he was willing to spend 3 taels of silver to rent the carriage. Normally, only 1 tael of silver would be sufficient to rent this kind of carriage. The driver was a skinny, tanned, middle-aged commoner who refused to partake in conversation. Other than the time Han Li had initiated a conversation and asked for directions, he wouldn't speak any unnecessary words, making Han Li feel satisfied. Next to Han Li was Crooked Soul, who had an immense stature and a mask to cover its face, making it seem extremely mysterious. If the driver was a gossip, there would surely be many troubles. The intelligent yellow-feathered cloud-winged bird stood on Han Li's shoulder. Its eyes were half closed, as if it were resting. Crooked Soul, who was in the seat facing Han Li, carried a large package. Other than some clean clothes, the package contained gold, silver, and some bottles that were pretty heavy. As for the rest, such as Dr. Mo's will and certain small miscellaneous items, Han Li carried them on his body, out of fear that he would misplace them. Han Li sat quietly in the carriage, listening to the sounds the wooden wheels made as they turned, with no fluctuation in his expression. There was no reason for him to be downcast about leaving the Seven Mysteries Sect. The only thing that he would not bear to leave behind was his intimate friend, Li Feiyu. But with the knowledge that his counterpart had received his note and the pills that he had concocted, Han Li hoped that these would be sufficient enough for Li Feiyu to carry out the second half of his life in peace. Thinking of this, he stretched his body, rested his back on the cushioned seats, and dozed off. As for his destination, he had already informed the driver earlier, the small village from which he had originated. Although he knew that it was impossible, he hoped beyond hope that, the moment he opened his eyes, he would be able to see the faces of his family surrounding him. He had left home for so many years that their faces had long blurred in his memory. Thus, before Han Li truly started on the next leg of his journey, he needed to see his family members one last time. If not, his heart would never be at ease. I wonder how my little sister is doing right now. She should already be 16 or 17, a grown woman. According to the letters that I received, it seems that she was betrothed to a good family and is currently preparing to get married. A weak and small figure appeared in Han Li's mind just as he was falling asleep. The owner of this figure was always behind him, calling out, "Fourth brother, fourth brother." Time truly passes by extremely fast. In this warm atmosphere with his own memories, Han Li fell asleep. This time, he slept soundly and was at peace, similar to the times when he was young and his parents were beside him, protecting him from danger. After 5 days of traveling along the yellow earthen path, Han Li finally saw a village far off in the distance. There was the low wall made of mud, the rows of rice paddies, and that bumpy road full of potholes. All this had once captivated Han Li so the extent that he had dreamt about it daily. Now, it finally appeared in front of his eyes. Han Li suppressed the excitement in his heart. He allowed the driver to stop the carriage far outside the village, while Crooked Soul remained in the carriage. Then, Han Li walked towards the direction of the village. The closer he got, the faster his heart thumped. For a time, Han Li became overwhelmed with emotions he had felt only long before. Chapter 99, Departure. Finally, Han Li entered the village, advancing step by step. As he walked through the village entrance, he heard a burst of joyous sounds from musical instruments. Strangely, not a single person could be seen as he walked through the village's small streets. Han Li's heart stirred. The empty streets and the joyous sounds were memories from his childhood that he couldn't be more familiar with. This was clearly someone's wedding celebration. Everyone in the village would celebrate and join in on the fun. Han Li lifted his spirits and slowly spread out his spiritual sense. By doing so, he discovered that both young and old had gathered together at the village center as he expected. However, the place they had gathered at felt so familiar to Han Li. Was this not the house where he had lived? Han Li was surprised by no small amount. Could it be? Han Li had a faint guess at last. He sped up his pace, hastily passing by many households and turning many corners until he saw the sight before him. Several hundred villagers were surrounding an earthen courtyard. Inside the courtyard, there were many tile-roofed houses that were in better condition than the houses nearby. A large banner with celebratory words hung from each entrance. In addition, there was a small group of instrumental performers that was making quite a bit of noise at the front of the courtyard. There were some villagers who stood, others who crouched, and a few who were not paying attention and simply sitting on the ground. Gathered into groups of 3 and 4, they whispered and sometimes engaged in heated arguments. Some continued to look at the courtyard with envy. In addition, there were many children joyfully chasing one another under adult supervision. Seeing this familiar scene, Han Li's mind was distracted for a time. In this split second, it was as if he had returned to his childhood from long ago and was with the other children, chasing them while making lots of noise. Z's, the Han family's 4th daughter, truly has good fortune. I heard the husband is a state official from the city, a truly studious and scholarly individual. TL, Z's the sound of a tongue clicking. Truly, and she is going to be his legal wife. She's going to have the status of an official's wife. TL, legal wife as opposed to being a concubine. I heard that the Han family had delivered a frighteningly large dowry, several dozen taels of snowflake silver. They are truly wealthy. The village women's noisy gossiping roused Han Li from his stupor. The Han family's 4th daughter. Isn't that my little sister? Could it truly be the day of my little sister's wedding? Han Li felt a burst of vague emotions continuously surging inside him. Though what he thought remained a mystery, Han Li hid behind a large nearby tree several steps away, attentively and unwaveringly staring at the courtyard gate. Suddenly, someone shouted from a distance, "The sedan chair has arrived. The groom has come to receive the bride." Upon hearing these words, the villagers were in an uproar, instantly becoming a boiling cauldron of voices. "The bride has emerged. The bride has emerged. Quickly come and see." The clamoring even surpassed that of the shrilling children. Han Li's spirit shook as he fervently continued to watch the courtyard gate. Creak, the wooden courtyard gate opened. More than a dozen men and women came out, escorting a young woman wearing a red wedding dress in between them. This young woman's chin was sharp, and her appearance was graceful, belonging to a girl 16 or 17 years old. At this moment her face was bashful. Han Li widely opened his eyes and attentively observed this young woman's appearance, trying to find some resemblance with the little sister from his memories. Aside from her general facial appearance and the corner of her eyes, he found no other trace of familiarity from his olden days. The rest of her appearance could no longer be associated with the little sister from his memories. "Sai, a girl changes 8 times from childhood to womanhood. These words truly make sense." Han Li bitterly smiled and then swept his gaze to the people at her side. "This fatty is 3rd uncle. I can already tell who he is with a single look. He's just as fat as before. That large tanned person at the side is eldest brother Han Tai. That woman close to his side should be his wife." Han Li's mouth muttered as he called their names out one by one. This somehow made him relax a little. When his gaze fell upon an old gray-haired couple, Han Li ceased speaking. Motionless, he blankly stood behind the tree. His expression became extremely complicated. Among these emotions included happiness, timidness, and bewilderment. His parents had aged far greater than Han Li had anticipated. When he had gone up the mountains, he remembered that his mother's hair was jet black. However, all of her hair was now ash-colored. Furthermore, his father's originally straight back was now hunched over. Han Li remained speechless, while his mind became dizzy like a ball of paste. Because of everything that had occurred, he didn't notice that it was already dawn. By the time he cleared his head, his little sister had already sat in the red silk sedan chair and was carried off into the distance. Following closely behind was a scholar mounted on a large cyan horse. Han Li focused his sight to look at the sedan chair that was moving further away. He gazed at his parents in the crowd, and then closed his eyes. After he had deeply engraved the appearances of his parents and several kin into his heart, he turned around. His face expressed unwavering determination as he walked toward the village's exit with large strides. Han Li knew that if he were to walk across the village entrance once more, he would come across these people and spend the rest of his life here. He clearly knew that ever since he had gained insights in the eternal spring arts and learned about the existence of immortal cultivation, he had walked on a path completely different from that of ordinary mortals. Regardless of whether there would be misfortune or happiness, prosperity or hardship, he would never regret his choice. Translator's note. Thank you for reading. This is the end of RMJI Book 1. I hope you've enjoyed the series so far. Chapter 100, Jia Yuan City. Lan Province is the 8th largest of the 13 provinces in the state of Yue. It is located in the southern region of the state of Yue. Despite its small size, it is said to be quite wealthy, second only to the Xin province. With fertile land, countless rivers, lakes, and canals running through the region, as well as constant favorable weather, the province was extremely suited to growing grain and rice. Thus, it became the state's largest producer of crops. Located in the center of Lan Province was Jia City. Although it wasn't the Lan Province's capital, it was, without question, the largest city in its province. The Great Lu Canal, which spanned from the north to the south of the province, passed through the center of the city. In addition, several roads and waterways also ran through the city. As a result, the city's transportation was highly developed and could be considered the hub of water transportation, as well as the main road of trade and commerce in the region. Every year, an enormous amount of merchants and travelers passed through, spurring an enormous amount of trade at this location. Therefore, the fact that Jia City became the largest city in the province was not strange in the least. In Jia City, there was traffic of all sorts. Docks and boatmen were numerous and could be found anywhere in the city. Boatmen, cart drivers, and unskilled laborers were as many as number of the hairs on an ox. There were several tens of thousands of people, including Sun Ergu, who relied on the harbor to make a living. Sun Ergu, Sun being a surname, not the star in the sky, and Ergu meaning second dog. Like his name suggested, Sun Ergu had long, slanted eyebrows and crooked eyes. In addition, he had the appearance of a ruffian, a cross between a rotten pear and a spoiled juju. However, because he was skilled in flattery and reading body language, he had actually been able to secure the position of minor gang leader. Managing several tens of unskilled porters, he made a living off the harbor transporting the goods and luggage of passing merchants. This was the reason why Sun Ergu's many subordinates had hastily gathered at early dawn and respectfully addressed him with, "Good morning, Grandpa-er." And Grandpa-er has come. In Confucianism, status is often associated with age. That is why you often see in Chinese stories, "I, your father," or this grandpa referring to self as a way of acting arrogant. Hearing these greetings, Sun Ergu could not help but be somewhat smug. After all, being addressed as grandpa indicated that here he was someone of status. Consequently, he exhibited an air of arrogance. He finally responded to his subordinate's greetings after snorting from his nose. "Who is Grandpa-er? Shouldn't it be Grandpa Ergu?" "It should, but here, there's only a two-legged dog imitating a man." A play on words from his name. Ergu two-goo dog. The burst of mocking and ridicule could not mask the words that entered Ergu's ear. After Sun Ergu had heard this, his face suddenly sunk, and his mood dropped in an instant. He slowly turned his head and looked to the several tens of people at the other side of the dock. He brought his gaze down to a large, burly, dark-skinned man, as a hint of hate flashed in his eyes. Among all the people that Sun Ergu hated the most in the entire city of Jia, this large, dark-skinned man would absolutely make it into his top 3. If someone were to tell him that he or she would use the wealth of Sun Ergu's entire family to thoroughly make this large, dark-skinned man disappear from the world, Sun Ergu might hesitate. But if he or she changed it to only half of Sun Ergu's wealth, he wouldn't hesitate to agree in the least. Naturally, this was because he led a life of decadence. The so-called entirety of his family's wealth wasn't much to begin with. No one had known what the dark-skinned man's name was for quite a long time. The people at the harbor either addressed him as Grandpa Black or his nickname, Black Bear. He was the leader of the small gang Iron Fist Group, while Sun Ergu held a similar status in the 4th-level gang. As a result, these factions had arrived at this dock to supervise the porters of their respective sides. A mountain cannot hold 2 tigers, let alone this minuscule dock. As a result, the 2 gangs have had tense relations since. After several conflicts over merchant customers, their relationships grew even more vile. Whenever the 2 gangs saw each other, they would sneer in contempt and shove each other aside, falling short of a full-on conflict. If the subordinates acted in this manner, then what was there to say about the greatest beneficiaries of the business here, Sun Ergu and Black Bear? These 2 figures looked at each other with great dislike. However, as the young gang leaders, these 2 knew that the Iron Fist Group and the 4th-level gang were allied gangs. They had united to fend off the comparatively larger Poison Dragon gang. As a result, although the 2 had wanted to drive the other away from this place and monopolize the dock, they could only restrain themselves for the time being. However, they accumulated resentment and fury against one another and vented their feelings through their subordinates verbal conflicts. Their exchange of insults had become a common occurrence that took place every morning. As a matter of fact, Sun Ergu's subordinates did not even wait to initiate a conflict. Many clever, eloquent subordinates struck back without a trace of politeness. Do you know what animal is the most stupid of them all? Bears. Which of bears are the most stupid? Black bears, without a doubt. Huh? When Black Bear had originally heard his own subordinates ridicule the other party, his face wore a proud expression. However, his elated face darkened after hearing these words. Sun Ergu started to smile. Pleased, he patted the shoulders of several subordinates to further encourage them. Black Bear's subordinates were not to be outdone. Those on Sun Ergu's side were not polite either. A great deal of filthy words spurted out from both sides. Everyone became each other's old grandpa, and neither side feared the other. Naturally, the conflict at the dock was not pleasant to hear. Vulgar unpleasantries of all kinds were exchanged. As the leaders of their respective gangs, Sun Ergu and Black Bear coolly looked at each other. Since they were people with status, they naturally could not join in the abusive, quarrelsome racket. Just as these two sides' mouths and tongues were about to dry, saliva suddenly splattered. One of Sun Ergu's subordinates cried out in alarm, "A boat is drawing near." These words roused Black Bear's near 100 cursing subordinates, who all exhaled in surprise. They all stopped making noise and immediately turned their gazes toward the river bank. After all, shining white silver was far more attractive than the fleeting verbal delight. However, when Black Bear's group looked toward the boat in the dock, they were somewhat disappointed. It was only a small flat boat. At best, it would only have 3 to 5 merchant customers, which was not a large amount of business at all. This was not surprising, given that this dock was rotten and small. In addition, its location was far from the city. Under these circumstances, it was only natural that no big boats would come here. However, during peak season for trade and commerce, other docks would have no space for large boats, so merchants would have no choice but to disembark here. After this small boat stopped at the dock, 2 people climbed off board. One appeared to be a common youngster about 17 to 18 years old. The other was a large man at least 2 heads taller than an ordinary person. The youngster wore a common azure garment, and a small yellow bird perched on his shoulder. Just as he stepped off board, he looked around. He had the appearance of a rural villager that had entered the city for the first time. The huge man wore a green gown and a mantle over his head. His facial appearances were unclear because he wore his clothes in a strange manner. The huge man followed close behind the youngster, refusing to fall even a step behind. Based on his appearance, it seemed that he was a servant. The huge man and the youngster were actually Han Li and Crooked Soul. They had traveled on the road for 3 consecutive months before arriving at Dr. Mo's homeland. TL note, this is the start of Book 2. You're in for a great ride. Please check out our Patreon or donate if you are able. It greatly helps the translation effort and will increase the release rate. Chapter 101, Troubles Brought Upon by Riches. Chapter 101, Troubles Brought Upon by Riches. Han Li had traveled in a southeastern direction from his hometown and rushed straight towards the land province. On the way, he had met with other travelers, but when they arrived at the bustling city streets, Han Li had left their company to take a shortcut on a path that ran through the desolate wilderness. He didn't face much danger even halfway through the journey. In fact, the only slightly dangerous incident he had encountered was when he had met several hungry wild wolves during his stay at some remote region in the vast wilderness. Although the wolves were the ones hunting Han Li, they ended up as Han Li's dinner instead. Han Li had traveled through 2 other provinces before finally arriving at Land Province with a body covered in dust. The moment he entered the Land Province, he was amazed by the massive water channels he saw, sprawling from one end to the other and accessible from all directions. After all, he came from a region where there was mostly just mountainous wilderness. There weren't many places to see small lakes, not to mention big lakes and canals. As for drinking water, they would usually obtain it from wells or small creeks. Thus, Han Li was extremely interested in the boats and crafts that were sailing on the water canals. In the end, because of his curiosity and obsession, he had spent some money and rented a small boat, savoring the taste of his virgin sailing experience. After 10 days of pleasant sailing, Han Li had arrived at Jiayuan City, which was mentioned in Dr. Mo's will, and sailed into an unremarkable dock. The first impression the dock gave Han Li was that it was far too decrepit. The dock was constructed entirely from simple wooden panels. Not only was the place narrow and crude, but rotten baskets and broken bags were also strewn about, making the dock incomparably dirty. Standing on the two bamboo piers at the sides of the dock were several tens of bare-chested men who wore only short pants and emitted a strong odor from their sturdy builds. Currently, all these sturdy males were staring unblinkingly at him and Crooked Soul. Not only that, but there were also some who even revealed a fervent look in their eyes. Han Li was surprised for a moment, but he immediately smiled faintly. Before disembarking from his small boat and descending onto the dock, the boatman had warmly reminded him that inside Jiayuan City, the pier had an unwritten rule. No matter the amount of cargo that a passenger brought, he had to hire a porter from the pier to help him. If not, the passenger would face negative, unkind treatment from the harbor gangs and might even get beaten up. Since this was Han Li's first time here, he had no intentions to disrupt the social customs, so he honestly asked, "I need to hire a porter. Is there anyone available?" Sun Ergu retracted his sight. From his previous inspection, he could already tell that the youth who had just left the boat was a young master from some rich clan. Not only that, but also the giant man was most likely his bodyguard. This type of pair was frequently seen throughout the year whenever young masters from wealthy clans came to visit Jiayuan City. These young masters were often here to expand their horizons and spend their money before going back to boast. Thus, there wasn't much to be bothered about them. But these types of people, who loved to slap themselves until they were swollen in order to look imposing, made for perfect targets. As long as he used sweet words to flatter them, these country bumpkins would scatter their money about freely. As a result, they were a good source of business to the shopkeepers here. However, it wasn't the fourth-level gang's turn this time around. According to his prior agreement with Black Bear, the two gangs would take turns doing business with the unsuspecting tourists, and stealing customers would not be tolerated. As for the amount of money to be made, it depended on their luck. The day before, they had made a deal ensuring that today was the Black Bear gang's turn. Thinking of this, Sun Ergu glanced over to the side, only to see Black Bear's men discussing in a low voice. Shortly after, a man ran excitedly towards the direction of the youth. "Out of the question. It's impossible for you to carry my belongings alone. Call another person over." Han Li commanded as he looked at this robust man, glanced at the large amount of baggage on Crooked Soul's back, and lightly shook his head. "Young master, I'm strong enough to carry such a small luggage with just one hand. There's no need to look for others." The muscular man wasn't willing to split his earnings with the other porters. Not only that, he was sure that there was no way he wouldn't be able to carry the baggage unless it was filled with stones. After he finished speaking, the muscular man walked in front of Crooked Soul, with the intent to snatch the luggage away. Han Li sighed. Inside the luggage, there was about 2,000 taels of silver, as well as an assortment of other random items. The total weight, which was not light at all, was impossible for ordinary humans to carry. But seeing how passionate the muscular man was, Han Li could only helplessly signal Crooked Soul to hand the baggage over to the muscular man before he tried to snatch it. As expected, once the baggage was in the muscular man's hands, his countenance underwent a drastic change. He expended his energy but could only walk a few steps before running out of breath. Embarrassed, the man had to put down the baggage and eventually called one more person for help. Han Li finally nodded his head in satisfaction upon seeing that the two of them were able to carry the baggage. He quickly left the harbor, walking on the path that led to the city. It wasn't that Han Li lacked knowledge about how the world functioned. Although his experience in Jianghu was limited, he could sense the pair staring at him through eyes filled with greed. Little did they know that they were about to invite trouble of a magnitude that they would not be able to handle. Seeing the youth's back moving further and further away, Sun Ergu retracted his covetous gaze. He suppressed the joy within his heart and locked his eyes with the eyes of Black Bear, who was on the opposite side of the dock. Both of them knew that within the baggage, there was most likely an immense wealth. As expected, Black Bear was also filled with joy. He slightly hesitated before flashing a look over to Sun Ergu, who intuitively walked towards a nearby rubbish dump. Before this huge source of wealth, even if Black Bear was the one who killed Sun Ergu's father and stole his wife, he would also be willing to put aside all grievances and work together. After all, humans die for wealth, while birds die for food. TL, idiom, man will do anything in his power to become rich. 50-50, Sun Ergu said in a low voice. 30-70, this was originally our prey, Black Bear directly refuted. 40-60, and I can't lower it any further. Your explanation is not enough to make me concede. Sun Ergu stated in a sly manner, hitting the nail on the head. This, Black Bear hesitated. Naturally, he wanted to maximize his own profits. HMPH, you can take your time to think all you want, but I'm afraid that people from the other gangs already have their eyes on this fat sheep. Sun Ergu coldly snorted. All right, we'll do it your way. Let's strike our palms to seal the deal. Black Bear was obviously agitated by Sun Ergu's words, but he quickly agreed to the offer. Pa Sun Ergu and Black Bear spat on their palms and struck each other's palms 3 times, forming a temporary alliance. Okay, quick, we need to catch up to him before he disappears into the crowded areas, Sun Ergu hurriedly exclaimed. Don't you worry, I've already instructed the 2 whom he hired as porters to lead him into a backwater alley. Let's hurry over there now to intercept them. Considering himself quite crafty, Black Bear laughed. Excellent, what a cunning plan, my old brother. Sun Ergu's expression broke into joy, but inside, his heart shuddered. He silently reminded himself to increase his guard when dealing with Black Bear. Chapter 102, Murder on Arrival. Walking away from the dock, Han Li had his 2 porters walk in front of him and lead him to a nearby inn. He planned to first have a proper rest and then think of his other affairs. These 2 men didn't hesitate to lead Han Li into the city. On the way, they turned 7 corners and changed directions 8 times. After they walked for a good while, he hadn't seen the slightest trace of an inn. Although Han Li continued to follow behind the 2 porters, he saw that with each passing road intersection, his surroundings became increasingly desolate. He wrinkled his brow. Although he hadn't lodged within a large city before, he still knew that it was impossible for an inn to be established in such a secluded place. What customers would possibly arrive here? Thus, when they brought him into a filthy, dark alley, Han Li bitterly smiled. He felt that he should immediately restrain the 2 and torture them into telling him what sort of scheme they were planning. Just as Han Li had thought to act, 10 large men suddenly appeared further up ahead in the alley. These men seemed somewhat familiar. Indeed, he had seen them earlier at the docks. These men held a variety of iron clubs and daggers. At this moment, they gazed at Han Li and Crooked Soul with malicious intent. In addition, those 2 porters who were carrying Han Li's luggage suddenly charged into the crowd and turned their heads, giving Han Li a sinister smile. Han Li sighed. It seemed he no longer needed to interrogate them because he realized their plan. He didn't expect that, as soon as he stepped foot on Dr. Mo's hometown, he would come across a cheap plot to kill him for his money. Boy, don't blame our cruel hearts. You should blame whoever let you bring this much silver for your bad luck, a coarse voice spoke from behind him. Han Li turned to look, finding 7 to 8 robust men appear behind him. They were led by 2 men. One of them was tall and burly, and had black skin, while the other had a crooked head and rat eyes. They were Black Bear and Sun Ergu. This was not the first time these 2 had done this kind of shady business, plotting to kill and steal. They clearly understood that, so long as the job was done cleanly and no witnesses remained, the authorities would not take notice of it. After all, even if someone were to report a missing foreigner, the amount of people that went missing each year was far too great. It was impossible to expend the great amount of effort to look for them one after another. That was why, after Black Bear had finished talking, he did not hesitate to signal several men to charge. Those men brandished their deadly weapons and quickly surrounded Han Li and Crooked Soul. Seeing these large men's bloodthirsty, cruel appearances, Han Li could not help but feel a desire to kill flash through his eyes. He knew that these men had done such deplorable acts on more than one occasion. Otherwise, they wouldn't reek so strongly of blood. Kill them all, do not hold back, Han Li coldly commanded Crooked Soul. Upon hearing Han Li, Crooked Soul let out several soft roars, each roar carrying a trace of excitement. It suddenly charged out, rushing directly into the crowd. The giant let out a punch as fast as lightning, hitting a large man's head. That robust man became like a bag of sand, flying crookedly into a stone wall. His blood and brains streamed all over the ground. Only half of his head remained. At this time, one man wielding a dagger and another with a crude iron club took this opportunity to attack Crooked Soul's back. Crooked Soul didn't turn its head. Instead, it waved its arm behind its neck, slashing around in a semicircle. Peng, peng. The pair's weapons flew into the air, along with the hands grasping them. Fresh blood dripped down between their thumbs and forefingers. Crooked Soul immediately stood on a single leg and swept the other leg behind him like a sickle as fast as the wind. The 2 assailants were immediately kicked in the abdomen and flew more than 3 meters away. They fell onto the ground, motionless. When the others saw these events, they sucked in a breath of cold air. A look of fear flashed in the faces of the men surrounding them. They became somewhat hesitant to attack. Even though they had stopped their hands, Crooked Soul shot its arms out without restraint, smashing the skulls of the two men who were at his side. Without Han Li's command, it would not stop its hand of its own accord. Sun Ergu and Black Bear's complexions were very unsightly. It was very clear that this large figure that they had mistaken as an ordinary bodyguard was actually a peerless expert. Kill this man. Each person who participates will be rewarded 20 taels of silver. Sun Ergu had an unclear premonition in his mind, and hastily sent out the several experts at his side by issuing a great reward. As soon as the men beside Black Bear and Sun Ergu heard this, their faces showed an expression of joy. These shallow martial artists only knew some basic boxing skills and naturally couldn't tell that, against Crooked Soul, the difference in their strengths was like the distance between heaven and earth. They had merely believed that their opponent was simply a little stronger than them and slightly more skilled. Thus, they possessed no fear at all. Now, galvanized by the temptation of a great reward, they charged towards Crooked Soul one after another. After Black Bear heard Sun Ergu's words, his face twitched, but his face soon became calm. Without saying a single word, his gaze simply drifted erratically to and from Han Li. Currently, Black Bear was constantly complaining to himself. He and Sun Ergu were different. He was able to climb to his current position because he could rely on his strength in an exchange with real weapons. This was why, in addition to having an adequate physique and exceptional eyesight, he could enter the ranks of third-rank martial artists. As a result, when he saw Crooked Soul fight, his heart jumped like a spear. When his heart finally fell to the ground, he could see that Crooked Soul's skill was great profound. Even if the two gang leaders were to join the fray, their odds of success would not necessarily be high, let alone with their weak subordinates, who were like kittens and puppies. However, he didn't dare to flee because this large man had clearly not exerted his full strength. If Crooked Soul were to see him attempting to escape, Black Bear feared that he would die a faster death. In order to live, it seemed that he could only attack that rustic youngster, whose status was far greater than the large man's. Only by threatening this man with a hostage could Black Bear possibly escape from death. As for the silver, he wouldn't dare ask for it. With such a ferocious bodyguard, perhaps he was the young master of some wealthy provincial lord. He was clearly the son of some influential family and was disguising himself for a stroll. Today, Black Bear could escape death. Even if he had the blessing and protection of the gods, taking the heavy bundle was naturally an entirely different matter. Black Bear thought of this and decided to take advantage of his subordinate's charge. After he signaled Sun Ergu with his eyes, he stealthily approached the stage. Chapter 103 Subdue. Chapter 103 Subdue. Han Li had his back facing Black Bear, who was standing alongside the battling crowd. Although Black Bear tried his best to soften his footsteps, how could it possibly escape Han Li's notice? As the distance between Black Bear and Han Li shortened to just a few steps, Black Bear started to sprint, moving frenziedly like a demon. Han Li lightly shifted his body slightly and pivoted to directly face Black Bear, revealing a smile on his face. Black Bear was shocked out of his wits, but he could no longer stop his momentum. Helplessly, he could only roar as he extended his black hairy hands, grabbing ruthlessly towards Han Li. He estimated that Han Li was just someone without much battle experience, and should have been shocked immobile by his savage, demon-like rush, thus rendering him vulnerable. Upon seeing the black, burly man recklessly raise his hand against him, Han Li's expression suddenly sunk. His body flickered and disappeared right in front of Black Bear's eyes. Black Bear's roar became stuck in his throat as he quickly halted his steps, planning to run away. Suddenly, he felt the point of a sword that shone brilliantly like snow coming into contact with his throat before it disappeared once more. Black Bear rapidly covered the bleeding wound with his hands and attempted to speak. However, only some unintelligible grunts was heard before his corpse fell onto the ground. The color of Sun Ergu's face turned waxy yellow. He had witnessed the youth moving like a specter as he appeared behind Black Bear's back and easily sliced Black Bear's throat with a flexible sword he had drawn from his waist. Afterward, the youth took out a white cloth and wiped the blood off his sword. The young man raised his head and flashed a smile at Sun Ergu, almost as if he could sense Sun Ergu's gaze. As if he had seen a poisonous snake, Sun Ergu quickly retracted his gaze. His longtime enemy Black Bear had just died, but he felt not a hint of joy or excitement. On the contrary, he felt sad and mournful, like a person in distress. He was completely awake now, and he knew full well that this young man was no fat sheep, but rather a King Yan from hell who wanted his life. King Yan, the god of death and a ruler of one of hell's 18 levels. The only slight trace of hope that Sun Ergu had left was whether his subordinates were able to defeat Han Li's giant bodyguard. If that were the case, then he would still have a chance at surviving, enabling him to negotiate with the young man and thus saving his insignificant little life. But as soon as Sun Ergu saw the situation unfolding over there with the young man's giant bodyguard, he became dumbstruck like a wooden chicken. Lacking the strength to move even a single muscle, over 20 burly men were lying on the ground, bleeding profusely. The giant bodyguard glanced coldly in Sun Ergu's direction. Although a mantle was obscuring the giant's features, Sun Ergu could still feel a bestial, bloody aura emanating from the large figure, causing his waxy yellow face to turn pale white. Han Li observed the variation of expressions on Sun Ergu's face, and from his movements, Han Li determined that this person did not know martial arts. Looking at Sun Ergu's face of abject terror, Han Li disdained from dealing with Sun Ergu personally. "Crooked soul, kill him," Han Li commanded. "No, please, I surrender. I'm willing to give up all my fortune to young master. I'm willing to work like a slave, and I know all the news floating around Jiayuan City. I could be a good lapdog for young master." Sun Ergu walked over, step by step, towards the large man whom he viewed as a demon. Begging for mercy in a panic, he frightenedly limped across the ground. "AI?" Han Li originally wanted to ignore Sun Ergu's words, but as soon as he heard that Sun Ergu knew all the news regarding Jiayuan City, his heart was moved. He became filled with joy. "Stay your hand for now," he commanded to Crooked Soul, who was about to twist Sun Ergu's neck. Han Li walked forward, stopping right in front of Sun Ergu. "Are you very familiar with Jiayuan City?" Han Li smiled as he asked, taking on the very appearance of kindness. Just earlier, Sun Ergu had seen Han Li's ruthless side, so how would he dare to be slow to reply? Immediately, his voice quavered as he shouted, "Very familiar, extremely familiar. I grew up here, so I know everything that happens here as if it were on the back of my hand." Now it was as if he had grabbed onto a life-saving strand of grass. He couldn't help but wish he could make himself sound more useful by a tenfold, so that Han Li would feel that he was still of use. Hearing Sun Ergu's reply, Han Li touched his own nose in consideration before pulling a bottle out from his robes. He took out a white, longan-sized medicine from the bottle and handed it to Sun Ergu. A longan is a fruit belonging to the same family as the lychee. "Either you consume this or you die," Han Li told him in straightforward manner. The hand that Sun Ergu extended to take the medicine trembled violently. He hesitated while looking at the white pill in his hands before shifting his eyes to meet Han Li's cold gaze. Coughing a few times, he had no choice but to ingest the pill. "Good, I can trust you now." Satisfied, Han Li nodded his head. "The name of this pill is Rotten Heart Pill, and it was personally concocted by me. Every month you need to consume the antidote, or else your inner organs will rot, causing you to die. I believe that you are an intelligent man, and you will serve me to the best of your abilities," Han Li coldly and threateningly stated. Sun Ergu was already prepared in his heart, but upon hearing the effects of the pill he had just consumed, he couldn't help but to wail pitifully, appearing extremely depressed. "Relax. As long as you help me settle what I need to do in the Jiayuan City, I will neutralize the poison and return your freedom back to you. Based on your martial skills, I can't really put you to good use anywhere else." Han Li used both the stick and carrot, giving Sun Ergu the assurance that as long as he completed his task well, there was still some hope that he would be freed. "Truly, young master." Sun Ergu's expression slightly trembled upon hearing this news. "Take these taels of silver with you and clean up this place. I don't wish for this matter to spread, do you understand?" Han Li commanded as he tossed a bag of silver over to him. After catching the bag, Sun Ergu weighed it in his hand. It was heavy, as if there were about 200 taels of silver inside. An expression of joy appeared on his face. He realized that if he could work for such a man with riches and authority, it might not necessarily be a bad thing. "Young master, please leave this to me. I will handle this well without creating any trouble for you," he laughed as he patted his chest proudly. "Okay, I shall leave first to find an inn. Tomorrow morning come look for me. Since you yourself claim to be the local head in Jiayuan City, you should be able to find out which inn I will stay in," Han Li commanded again, without a trace of politeness in his voice. "Yes, yes, tomorrow morning I will be there, waiting for young master's commands." At this stage, Sun Ergu could only be described as eager to become Han Li's lackey. Han Li smiled as he gestured to Crooked Soul, who picked up the baggage and left the alley. After walking a distance, Han Li turned back and glanced at Sun Ergu, only to find him obediently standing there at the same spot. Sun Ergu was using his eyes to respectfully send Han Li off, showing an expression of fear and loyalty. Interesting? Han Li suddenly felt that this person was extremely interesting and intelligent. Perhaps he could really put him to good use in a sticky situation. Chapter 104 Information. Chapter 104 Information. The gang I founded, the Fearsome Flood Dragon Association, possesses 64,000 common gang members. Core gang members include more than 7,000 people. It is also one of the 3 great overlords of the land province. Its main branch is set up in Jiayuan City, and its side branches are. Throughout my life, I married 5 women and witnessed the birth of 2 daughters, my apprentices. First wife Jin, she had a gentle disposition. She was the sole daughter of the Golden Lion Escort Company's head escort chief, Jin Kan. She has already passed away, leaving behind her daughter Mo Yuju. TL. When talking about his wives, Dr. Mo is listing the order in which he married them and their maiden clan name. Second wife Li was educated and well-balanced. She was the daughter of some rich household. Unfortunately, she did not have any children. Third wife Liu has a bold disposition, but she is rather ambitious. She is the younger sister of Qualang City's Lord and Wind sect leader Liu Feng. She bore no children. Pay great attention to her. TL. Qualang means crooked tomb. Fourth wife Yan is my younger female cousin from my mother's side. She has a calm disposition, excels in scheming, and has great ingenuity. She raised 1 daughter, Mo Keihuan. Before I departed, I bestowed most of my authority over Fearsome Flood Dragon Association to her. You can trust her. Fifth wife Wang is taciturn. She was infatuated with me and was previously first wife Jin's personal maid. She did not bear children, and she secretly grasped hidden strength. You can trust her unconditionally. Adopted daughter Mo Feng Wu is the daughter of my confidant and subordinate. After her parents died, I received her as an adopted daughter. Before I left, she had just turned 7 and was exceptionally intelligent. Yan Ji, eldest disciple. His aptitude is common. I have already passed on the cultivation methods for demonic silver hand over to him. Before I left, he was 12 years old. His temperament is average. Zhao Kun, second disciple. I already passed on the sleeping dragon arts to him. Before my departure, he was 10 years old. His temperament is indiscernible. Ma Kongshan, my sworn little brother. He serves as a protector for the Fearsome Flood Dragon Association. His temperament. Han Li held in his hand a paper filled with handwriting, Dr. Mo's will. Currently, he was inside Hu Yuan In's top room, walking to and fro repeatedly as he remained lost in thought. The will was written attentively. Not only did it clearly explain the powerhouse that Dr. Mo had established, the Fearsome Flood Dragon Association, but it also crudely described the temperament of his wives thoroughly. This caused Han Li's heart to sink slightly. What was mentioned in his will were matters from 10 years ago. The present state of affairs were sure to have had undergone an absolutely earth-shaking change. How should this be done? Should he contact Dr. Mo's wives or steal the Yang jaded treasure and escape without a trace? These decisions required Han Li to fully understand the current state of affairs. Thus, the local thug he subdued yesterday, Sun Ergu, was of great use to him. Han Li could probably acquire a lot of useful information from him. After Han Li carefully read through the will, he put it away into his bosom. Then, lost in thought, he raised his head, walked to the bed, and sat down. He spread his legs and raised his palms to the sky before setting them on his knees. Afterwards, he shut his eyes and began to inspect his body's condition. The thread of cold yin poison inside his dantian had started spreading outward a month ago. It was originally just a trace of an indistinct shadow, but it had currently condensed into a black pea-sized sphere. In addition, it's slowly beginning to grow in size. TL. Dantian generally references to a place below your navel where essence and chi gathers. According to Han Li's estimates, he would have 2 months at most before this yin poison thoroughly broke out. When that time came, he feared that he would truly be hard-pressed to escape death. Just as Han Li was worried sick, as he secretly resolved himself to acquire the warm Yang precious jade, someone knocked on his door. "Come in," Han Li coldly said as he opened his eyes. The room door softly opened, and Sun Ergu walked in with his head lowered. As soon as he saw Han Li, he acted with the greatest of courtesy, declaring respectfully, "Greetings, young master. Sun Ergu has come to hear young master's assignments." "Not bad, you found me quite quickly. You truly do have some skill," Han Li said in satisfaction. He then stood up from the bed and then, with his hands behind his back, he walked in front of Sun Ergu. "I'm indebted by young master's praise. If I could not perform such a small, trivial task, then for what reason would young master have spared my humble life?" Sun Ergu's happy face showed a great loyalty. When Sun Ergu had returned that day, it wasn't as if he hadn't thought of informing his superiors of the matter regarding Han Li and have experts come to take revenge. But when he thought of the rotten heart pill that he had consumed, his courage thoroughly disappeared. After a night of great consideration, he couldn't think of any other options and was left with no choice but to obediently pay Han Li a visit. He only wished that, when he provided his assistance in the future, he would be given the antidote to this frightening, rotten heart pill. "First, tell me your status. From your appearance that day, it would seem that you're a small chief," Han Li indifferently said. "I'm a dock overseer for the Western City District's 4th-level gang. I have about 450 subordinates and could be considered a minor gang leader," Sun Ergu replied respectfully. "4th-level gang?" Han Li dully asked. "That's right. 4th-level gang is one of the 33 small gangs in the western part of Jiayuan City. It has about 1,000 gang members, but most of them are dock coolies. The gang head is the ape, Shen Zhongshan. He has 3 great protectors as subordinates." Sun Ergu immediately gave the complete details discreetly. Although he had revealed information about his gang to an outsider, his face didn't have the slightest amount of shame. "TL Coolie, an unskilled native laborer. That large, dark-skinned man I took care of yesterday, was he also part of the 4th-level gang?" "He was not. That person was called Black Bear, and he was a gang leader of the Iron Fist Group, another one of the 33 gangs. We were not on good terms with one another," Sun Ergu replied with a flattering smile. "Even though this is just the western part of the city, there are already so many small gangs. Thus, in the entire Jiayuan city, the total number must be quite large, right?" With his hands behind his back, Han Li unhurriedly returned to the front of the bed. "Of course, in the entire Jiayuan city, there are more than 40 small gangs with 1,000 members or less. There are 7 to 8 medium-sized gangs with 3 to 4,000 members. With regards to the large gangs that have over 10,000 members, there are only 3. Sun Ergu stood there, speaking with absolute honesty. "Tell me about the state of affairs in both the large and medium-sized gangs. You don't need to tell me about the small gangs." Han Li pulled up his sleeves and sat down on the bed. Afterwards, the calm Sun Ergu started talking. Chapter 105 Shocking News. Chapter 105 Shocking News. The 3 largest gangs in Jiayuan City are the Brothers, Union, the Fearsome Flood Dragon Association, and the Heavenly Tyrant Sect. The smaller gangs are the Iron Spear Association, the Sworn Brotherhood, the Azure Clothed Gang, the Spring Rain Building, the Gold Sword Sect, the Dark Riverboat Gang, the Diamond Sect, the Setting Sun School, and several other sects. Sun Ergu named all these gangs in one breath. Panting, he continued. "The strongest of the 3 large factions is the Heavenly Tyrant Sect. It is allied with the Gold Sword Sect and Azure Clothed Gang, and they occupy the Eastern City District, which is the most prosperous district. The Brothers Union, which is slightly weaker, is allied with the Iron Spear Association. The Dark Riverboat Gang, and the Sworn Brotherhood occupies the Northern City District. The weakest, the Fearsome Flood Dragon Association, rules over the Southern City District, alongside the Spring Rain Building, the Diamond Sect, and the Setting Sun School. Lastly, the chaotic Western City District is divided amongst numerous smaller gangs. Although these small gangs are constantly involved in power struggles, if a larger power wanted to invade the Western City District, then the smaller gangs would cease fighting and face the external attackers. Thus, the entire Jiayuan city could be considered a 4-sided confrontation." Sun Ergu's words came out like a torrent from his mouth, never ending. Without even pausing to think, he had explained the general state of affairs of every power within the city. After Han Li heard the explanation, he muttered to himself for a moment before thoughtfully asking, "I've heard people say that the Fearsome Flood Dragon Association was one of the land province's 3 overlords, and that Jiayuan City was where it originally established its headquarters. How did it become the weakest of the 3 large gangs of the city?" "Young master, what you said is ancient history. Many years ago, the Fearsome Flood Dragon Association was truly ferocious, and its power nearly encompassed the entire land province. As a superpower during that time, the Fearsome Flood Dragon Association had its headquarters located in Jiayuan City. It was originally intolerant of other gangs stepping in, and as a result, the Fearsome Flood Dragon Association controlled the entire city by itself. Back then, the other gangs didn't even dare to show their shadow under the Fearsome Flood Dragon Association's intimidation. However, for an unknown reason, the Fearsome Flood Dragon Association suddenly decayed in power overnight. Not only did it lose some of its territories, the power of its headquarters in Jiayuan City greatly waned in power. Thus, gangs of all sizes took advantage of this opportunity and emerged from hiding. After several bloody battles, the situation we have today took shape. Sun Ergu explained this while remaining extremely politely. You know why the Fearsome Flood Dragon Association suddenly weakened? Han Li slowly asked Sun Ergu, furrowing his eyebrows. To tell you the truth, this humble person's status in his gang isn't very high. I truly do not know much about this, and the few things that I do know were told to me by other people. It seemed that the Fearsome Flood Dragon Association had an internal conflict that led to civil war. Its decline can also be attributed to other large powers that suppressed them from behind. Slightly embarrassed at himself for not knowing enough information, Sun Ergu gave Han Li a vague answer. Oh, so it was like that. Han Li slightly smiled. It seemed he had guessed this was the situation earlier. Who is currently in charge of the Fearsome Flood Dragon Association? You should at least know who, Han Li asked. I do know who. The person in charge of the Fearsome Flood Dragon Association is Lady Yan, the widow of the former Fearsome Flood Dragon Association's leader, Mo Juren. Sun Ergu hastily replied. Widow? Han Li was astonished. That's right, the original founder of the Fearsome Flood Dragon Association, Master Mo, died. Does his wife not become a widow? Sun Ergu blinked and grew somewhat hesitant. He did not know if he said something wrong. Who said that the association's Master Mo died? As his complexion turned colder, Han Li sensed that something was out of place. Everyone in Jiayuan City knows about this. A year ago, Ghost Hand Mo Juren's last disciple revealed that he had obtained Association Master Mo's will and keepsakes. With these in his possession, he announced Master Mo's death at the Mo estate. Last disciple, what was his name? Han Li calmly asked, raising his eyebrow. He is Wu Jianming, a 20-year-old pretty face. Rumors have it that he has already inherited Mo Juren's teachings, and his martial arts are incomparably high. Sun Ergu carefully told Han Li. At this moment, he already realized something. He was certain that this person was somehow related to the Fearsome Flood Dragon Association and seemed to be paying close attention to that young Master Wu. In addition, Sun Ergu seemed as if he wanted to say something but didn't dare to. If you have something to say, then speak frankly. Don't hold back. If this information is true, I will bestow upon you great rewards. I have heard people say that this young Master Wu is intimate with the Master Mo's daughter, Mo Yuju. I have also heard that they will soon marry each other. Hearing that there would be compensation, Sun Ergu spoke the truth freely, with a smile on his face. Marriage? Han Li chuckled and suddenly stood up. He paced back and forth several times in the room. Afterwards, he looked up to the ceiling and stopped. He seemed to be thinking of something. Hear this well. Your mission is quite simple. From today on, you will secretly gather information from me regarding the Mo estate. As for young Master Wu, the more details about him, the better. Take this silver. If this affair goes well, there will be even more rewards. Go handle it. Han Li casually tossed Sun Ergu a pouch of silver. I will follow your orders. Esteemed young master, please be at ease, for I will handle this matter well. This humble man will no longer trouble you and shall take his leave. Sun Ergu clutched the silver in his hands and walked out, beaming with joy. Before leaving, he had even took the time to politely close the door. This esteemed young master is truly generous with his money. All he wants me to do is a trivial task of gathering information. It seems that choosing to follow this person on that day was truly the right choice. Sun Ergu excitedly thought. At this moment, the matter of the rotten heart pill had been pushed to the back of his head. After seeing Sun Ergu's happy face as he walked out, Han Li lightly sighed. He suddenly felt somewhat regretful. He had been here for a mere 2 days and had already given away so much silver. This made him feel like a money squanderer. It is no matter. This silver could be considered as silver from Dr. Mo's account, even with the addition of a bit of interest, Han Li thought, finding joy in his sorrow. However, this young Master Wu Jianming is truly a clever person for actually trying to be the first to use his own identity to infiltrate the Mo estate, effectively acquiring power and wealth simultaneously. His courage is certainly admirable. Han Li stroked his nose with a cold smile. It seems that a visit to the Mo estate is inevitable. Otherwise, the precious warm Yang Jade will not be included in the dowry and instead will lie in that person's hand, Han Li thought, somewhat regretfully. Chapter 106, Blue-Clothed Man. Chapter 106, Blue-Clothed Man. On Southern District's busiest street, South Hill Street, there was a huge residence the size of several acres. The residence's courtyard had a large black gate from which a hanging sign revealed two words, Mo Estate. Beneath the sign, 8 large, imposing men were stationed evenly on both sides of the gate. Each of these formidable men held his head high and chest out with complete concentration. With just a glance, people would never dare to look down upon their well-trained and valiant appearances. The 3-story fragrant restaurant was just across the street from the Mo estate. The popularity of this large restaurant resounded in the entire Jia Yuan city. In addition, its signature drink, 100 cents, was famous for being a great wine, and it attracted many famous customers who passed by. It was currently time for the midday meal. As a result, the fragrant restaurant was packed with people. All the tables from the first floor to the third floor were packed with eating patrons. On the road, those who were about to pass by restaurant would smell the strong aroma of food and drool with hunger, completely captivated by the smell. On the second story, a youth sat next to the window, watching the street. There were quite a few tasty side dishes on his table, along with a bottle of the famous 100 cents. Behind the youth stood a large, intimidating man. This youth was none other than Han Li, who was scouting for information. At this moment, Han Li gazed down at something from the window. He turned a small wine cup that was filled to the brim in his hand, but his food sat on the table, untouched. Overall, he seemed absent-minded and careless. Han Li shot a tilted glance at the nearby Mo estate before looking down to the streets below him. His face's expression didn't change in the slightest. Raising his head to drink the cup of wine, he continued to look outside mysteriously. Han Li had already asked about Dr. Mo's 2 biological daughters and his adopted daughter. They had all grown up to become as delicate as a flower, as refined as a precious jade, beautiful and charming. They were known as Jia Yuan City's 3 great beauties. As a result, they were often referred to as the 3 prides of the Mo estate. Because of their beauty's great fame, they have been wooed by far too many young masters and heroic elites to count. Among these women was Mo Yuju, a peerless beauty. Amongst the 3, she was the one who was the most pursued. Thus, the news of her betrothal roused a great ruckus and broke the hearts of the men who were trying to woo her. There were a few martial artists that had challenged this young master Wu one after another. Wu Jianming ended up defeating 16 of these rivals of love in succession, thus consolidating his reputation as a peerless martial artist and causing him to be inseparable and closely intimate with Mo Yuju. Han Li thought that this matter was truly somewhat amusing and ridiculous. Others didn't know that this young Master Wu had some sort of inside information. However, Han Li was aware of the entire situation. Wu Jianming was sure to have been dispatched from Dr. Mo's enemy school. It seemed that the Dr. Mo's long absence had caused his enemies to grow suspicious. This young Master Wu had probably arrived to scout out the situation. Han Li did not know by what means he had been able to obtain the trust of the Mo estate, but the letter alone probably shouldn't have been enough to easily convince Dr. Mo's wives. Han Li used his finger to lightly tap the table as he contemplated about the matter. "Young master, please sit here. The dishes you ordered should arrive at once." The waiter wearing a short white jacket hurriedly led a blue-clothed man, who was 27 to 28 years old, to the second floor. In addition, the waiter had the man sit at an empty table next to Han Li. He then hastily returned to the first floor to take care of the other customers. This blue-clothed man was handsome. He had thick eyebrows, big eyes, and somewhat of a heroic air about him. After he sat down, he took a quick glimpse around his surroundings and just happened to meet Han Li's gaze. Han Li felt a profound, indescribable valiance from within the man's gaze that made him feel as if his very being was being absorbed. After a moment of shock, Han Li quickly turned his head away as his complexion faintly changed. This person was also greatly surprised. However, after giving Han Li a cold glance, he immediately turned his head, no longer paying any heed to Han Li. Han Li's complexion turned somewhat pale. Just a moment ago, a glimpse at that person had given him a feeling like that of having one's guts seen from inside out, overwhelming him with great shock. This was Han Li's first time experiencing such a glance, the kind of glance that made him feel as if his entire being had been completely exposed. After the blue-clothed man waited for his dishes to fill the table, he began to eat. Not only did he eat quite heartily, he also ate as if there were no one else there. At this moment, the frustrated Han Li was somewhat restless and worried. Although he currently didn't use the Heaven's Eye technique to observe the man, he felt quite a large amount of spiritual energy faintly emitting from the man's body, making Han Li stiff from awe. He clearly understood from this person's magic power that the man's cultivation no doubt was far deeper than his own. Back when he looked at the cultivators Yu Zhitong and Monk Golden Light, he had only seen feeble, pathetic magic powers that completely lacked the fundamental essence of life. Upon his encounters with them, he had been able to easily get rid of them both. Thus, Han Li still didn't understand a lot about cultivators. In his mind, cultivators were a mysterious existence. He truly didn't know how he should respond to another cultivator stronger than himself. Could I not treat this blue-clothed man like Monk Golden Light and unceremoniously eliminate him with my own hand? Han Li's mind could not help but think in the worst direction. While Han Li's thoughts were in turmoil and fear, the blue-clothed man had finished eating. He wiped his mouth with a hand towel, dropped a silver ingot on the table, and left like a breeze. From the beginning until the end, he never looked at Han Li again after their initial glance. It seemed that the man had completely forgotten about Han Li. Han Li waited until after this person had completely left the restaurant before exhaling deeply and lying down on his chair, paralyzed. Although the time during which the blue-clothed man ate was short, Han Li felt as if an entire day had passed by. The stress placed upon his mind was far too great. He felt as if he had just fought a battle of life and death. At this moment, the blue-clothed person appeared at the corner of the street. A 30-year-old man wearing a yellow jacket was waiting there for him. "Old Fourth, why have you come so late? We still have to meet up with eldest brother and the others." The yellow-jacketed man had some discontent in his voice. Second eldest brother, don't be angry. It's just that I haven't had mortal food for several years. I just want to have a taste," the blue-clothed person said with a joyful smile. "You glutton, how many times do I have to say this? We immortal cultivators should cleanse our heart of desires and abstain from gluttony, but you never listen. Your consumption will, at the very least, damage your nature greatly." The yellow-jacketed man glared at the blue-clothed person and sourly lectured him. I know, you don't have to tell me that again. Oh yeah, back at the restaurant I saw another cultivator." The blue-clothed person tried to change the topic, hastily mentioning his encounter with Han Li. "Oh really? Was his magic power deep or shallow?" Sure enough, this had captured the yellow-jacketed man's attention. His magic power was quite light. It seemed as if his cultivation base had just reached the 7th or 8th layer. He barely has the qualifications to participate in the Immortal Ascension Assembly. This truly does not make sense. With such shallow magic power, did he come to the land province to exploit some sort of opportunity? Could it be that he truly believes that he will come across unexpected success and obtain the final victory at the Great Immortal Ascension Assembly? The blue-clothed man flung these words from his mouth. Is he young or old? He looked to be 17 to 18 years old. If that is the case, he definitely followed his elders here in order to increase his experience and broaden his horizons. I reckon that in the Immortal Ascension Assembly 10 years from now, this talent would genuinely be able to participate," the yellow-jacketed man said with a smile. "I say, when you say it like that, his talent can be considered decent. If he comes back in 10 years, he could reach my level," the blue-clothed man said proudly. "Stop boasting. Your cultivation base has merely reached the 10th layer. Every year the Immortal Ascension Assembly produces many cultivators at this level. Once you've trained to the 11th or 12th layer, then you will be given the qualifications to boast," the yellow-jacketed man said while laughing cheerfully. "Truly, if I hadn't used the Foundation Establishment Pill, I could have trained to a level higher than the 10th layer. But then, what Immortal Ascension Assembly could I have participated in? I wouldn't have been able to find a master." The blue-clothed man pouted and murmured before following the yellow-jacketed man and leaving the area. Chapter 107, Mo Yuju. Chapter 107, Mo Yuju. Han Li naturally did not know about the conversation between the blue-clothed man and the yellow-jacketed man. He was still celebrating the fact that he had just escaped from a calamity. Although he was angered by the blue-clothed man's disregard for him, Han Li was extremely clear about the disparity in their strengths. Now that he had escaped, he felt as though he had just escaped death, so Han Li became extremely relaxed. After his encounter with the blue-clothed man, Han Li's heart couldn't calm down, so he could not recover his initially peaceful state of mind. Sighing, Han Li stood up and prepared to leave the inn. At this moment, the sounds of horses galloping suddenly rang out in the large street outside of the inn. The sound was getting closer and closer as the horses galloped into the vicinity. He was just about to stand up, but his attention was piqued. He sat back down and cast his gaze once again to the large street. According to the report by Sun Ergu, the sounds that the incoming horses were making was the sign that the Most Estate's eldest daughter, Mo Yuju, was returning back to the city from her travels outside. Rumors had it that this precious lady from the Mo Estate didn't enjoy doing what other girls her age did. Ever since she was young, she only showed interest in wielding the spear and becoming the leader of a gang. Thus, her elders organized an expert from the fearsome flood dragon to teach her martial arts. What was truly shocking was that this Miss Mo especially loved hunting, a sport that was supposed to be an activity exclusive to males. Every 2 to 3 days, Miss Mo would travel to the forest outside the city to hunt. This incited the various clans, young masters who wanted to woo her, to go hunting with her, chasing after eagles and hounds in hopes of obtaining her goodwill. Naturally, after young Master Wu had arrived, he too joined in this activity. After Han Li had heard the news, he was also curious about this eldest daughter from the Mo estate. After all, a girl with such a character was rarely seen. He hoped that such a lady wouldn't disappoint him. Now there were over 10 horse riders galloping from the end of the street. The frontmost riders consisted of a man and a woman. The male had a pair of sword-shaped eyebrows, a bright gaze, a lanky figure, and the look of a handsome, heroic youth. The female was wearing a fiery red hunting suit, along with a purple-colored veil to cover her face, hiding her facial features. In the blink of an eye, the group of hunters passed the front of the inn, past Han Li's sight, and finally stopped at the gate of the Mo estate. The 2 burly guards who were originally standing there immediately greeted them. One of the guards, a man with a face full of pockmarks, respectfully greeted. "Eldest Miss and Master Wu, both of you are back. How was today's harvest?" "Not too bad. Tang lead the horse away and help me take care of this wild game," the female wearing the hunting suit ordered. Before she dismounted her horse, she extended her hand to take off the veil that had been covering her face, revealing a face that could startle hearts and move souls. "Roger that, miss." The one named Tang showed that he dared not to even gaze upon the enchanting visage of this female as he hurriedly took over the reins and led the horse away, walking towards a side gate. Although the inn and the Mo estate were a distance away, Han Li could still see about 70 to 80% of the girl's features as he involuntarily drew in a huge breath. That shining snow-white skin, that dainty little nose, those black, sparkling eyes, and those ruby-red lips were all capable of sinking fishes and causing geese to fall from the skies. This lady is none other than Mo Yuju. No wonder she's capable of causing all the young masters in Jia Yuan City to go crazy for her. For such a supreme beauty, even toppling over empires wouldn't be strange. Han Li could not help but to think of her in such a way. By this time, the other hunters behind the handsome youth had all dismounted. Servants came forth and led their horses away. The youth smiled as he walked in front of Mo Yuju and whispered something to her, causing Miss Mo's face to redden. She gently hammered the shoulder of the male youth before shyly glancing at him and eventually running through the gate. The youth laughed as he walked inside with an elegant demeanor. This person was Wu Jianming. He really does know how to coax a girl. In any case, his looks are still passable, Han Li sourly stated in his heart. He knew that if they were to compete based on looks, there was no way for him to win against the handsome youth. It seems that Mo Yuju and this handsome young master have a deep relationship. He furrowed his brows, feeling slightly pressured. It seemed to him that this matter would not be settled as easily as he had imagined. No matter what, I must obtain and secure the precious warm Yang Jade. After all, there is an extraordinary yin poison in my body that might explode earlier than the predicted date. Han Li was deeply worried and anxious. He contemplated about the Mo estate again before summoning the waiter, settling his bill, and returning to the inn that he was staying at. After he pondered long and hard, Han Li decided to use the most direct and effective method. He planned to infiltrate the estate in the middle of the night and visit Lady Yan, the wife of the fearsome Flood Dragon Association's former leader. He intended to use the items that Dr. Mo had left for him and expose that impostor in the Mo estate. As for how he was going to get the precious jade, he could only wait and see, moving step by step. Since he had already made up his mind, Han Li no longer concerned himself regarding the consequences of his decision. He shut his eyes and began to prepare himself mentally for his nighttime activities. However, Mo Yuju's beautiful face kept surfacing in his mind during this span of time. No matter what he did, he wasn't able to banish his thoughts about her. Did I fall in love with that girl? Han Li asked himself, somewhat unnaturally. He consoled himself, saying, such a ravishing beauty, it's only normal that I would be attracted to her. I may not like her for certain. As someone who already made half a step onto the path of cultivation, although he had never had a relationship before, Han Li still tried his best to avoid matters such as love and courtship between the opposite S\X, even though he had never had a relationship before. About 3 in the morning, Han Li changed into a set of black clothes and sneaked out of the inn. He lightly sped past the roof and easily evaded the patrol on the streets, arriving outside of the Mo estate. After he checked out he smiled to himself, then transformed into smoke. As he drifted past the eyes of the guards, he entered into the backyard of the Mo estate without alerting them or causing them to notice anything out of the ordinary. Chapter 108, Entering the Mo estate at night. Behind the Mo estate lay a garden, not small in size, in which many rare flowers and herbs were planted. The flowery fragrance that the garden emanated was still revitalizing even though it was nighttime. Han Li involuntarily breathed in deeply. "AI?" Han Li suddenly slightly exclaimed. Although the fragrance of the flowers was thick, he could still differentiate between the familiar smells of herbal medicine. Someone planted medicinal herbs in here. Han Li lightly smiled. This familiar herbal scent caused him to feel extremely curious about the person who had planted the herbs. It appeared that someone within the Mo estate had inherited Dr. Mo's medicinal skills. Han Li did not dare to hesitate any longer. He continued on the little path and walked towards the areas that were lit up. Along the way, Han Li discovered that there were quite a few hidden sentries. He would not have detected the Mo estate's tight security if it weren't for his heightened senses. Since he had already discovered the hidden sentries, sneaking past them became an extremely easy task. Han Li stopped in front of a small, 2-story building. He chose this spot because he could sense that security was much tighter in this particular location. There were about 20 to 30 people guarding this area. This particular 2-story building was well lit. He knew that there was probably someone of extreme importance who had yet to fall asleep, which coincidentally suited his purposes. Making use of the dark night, he moved at a lightning-fast pace, his body blinking as he arrived at the bottom of the building. Using the strength in his legs, he easily jumped up onto the 2nd story of the building. The whole process took but an instant. The surrounding sentries did not even notice that Han Li had already infiltrated the building. Han Li kept his body close to the walls, causing his shadow to merge into the night, before pricking his ears, trying to use his sense of hearing to discern any movements in the building. Although Han Li could only hear a single female talking, he could discern that there was more than one person in this building. The branch from Changping Town sent over 7,300 taels of silver. The branch from Luogu Town sent over 5,800 taels of silver. The branch from Lan Yue Town sent over 10,500 taels of silver. Wuling Town. This is all of the profits that we received last month from our association's various branches. Overall, it's about 25% less than the profits we gained in the same month of last year. The sound of a melodious female voice that was filled with vitality drifted into Han Li's ears. The moment that he had heard it, he speculated that it belonged to a youthful female. She was somewhat unhappy, judging from the last words she had spoken. "Mother, these branch managers are getting bolder and bolder. The tribute they offer is increasingly less as the months go by," the youthful girl angrily stated. "I am well aware," another low, attractive voice rang out. Could she be one of the 3 ladies of the Mo clan? Han Li was somewhat shocked at his good luck. It seemed that the other woman in the room was Dr. Mo's wife. "Every time you say that you're aware about this, why don't you offer some ideas on how to settle this? If this continues, then all of our branches will no longer put us in their eyes one day," the youthful girl complained. "I don't have any good ideas right now. You must know that the branches are controlled by Fifth Mother. The others in the Mo clan have no way to interfere," the woman could only helplessly reply. Afterwards, the exchange of words stopped, allowing silence to descend. After several moments, the youthful girl's voice rang out in an unwilling tone. "Mother, could it be that we allowed Fifth Mother to have sole control over the branches? After Uncle Ma and the others got into a dispute, their infighting pushed into branches into a position where they became the pillar of support for our fearsome Flood Dragon Association. Mother, since you are the representative for the Flood Dragon Association, this power should instead be in your control." "What you said is correct. The year when your father left, he had passed the authority of the branches over to Fifth Mother. I don't really have an excuse to interfere. And because Fifth Mother grants us a large portion of the monthly tribute, I don't have the face to bring up the topic. The woman replied. But the strength of our fearsome flood dragon association is actually extremely weak. If we don't consolidate our strength, how can we ever rise again? Father is not thinking straight. He handed the reins of the association to you, but why did he also give Fifth Mother the authority over the branches? The tone of her words was filled with resentment against her father. Stop your nonsense. Your dad did this. Naturally, he had a deeper meaning behind his actions. It's not your place to criticize. The woman berated the youthful girl. I understand. I acknowledge my mistake, all right. Seems like Mother is still deeply in love with Father. The girl acted out of the ordinary and started laughing at her mother. This child, the woman loved her daughter very much. Speechless, she could only laugh bitterly. Han Li had already confirmed that the woman in the room was the Lady Yan he was looking for. In addition, the girl should be Mo Kei-hyun, the daughter of Lady Yan, and Dr. Mo. He was fortunate for having found who he had been looking for in such a quick fashion. Han Li extended his hands, touching the letter and the items left behind by Dr. Mo, and prepared to reveal himself to the two of them. Mother, that faker was extremely irritating. Today he found me at the garden and actually tried to shamelessly curry favor with me. He intended to sell me a few of his strong points, trying to appear as one who is skilled in both studies and martial arts. How disgusting. The girl added the last bit coquettishly, startling Han Li and making him withdraw the foot that he had originally extended into the room. TL, use of faker, is to refer to the person with the fake identity, Wu Jianming. You better be more courteous to the one surnamed Wu. After all, he is your fiancé in name. Don't let him notice anything that could make him suspicious. Lady Yan's tone grew heavy as she reminded the girl. Cough, this beautiful me is always surrounded by admirers, but you want me to act as though I've fallen head over heels with that man. That's too difficult of a task for me. If it were up to me, I would have run him through with a sword long ago, the girl replied. This matter is also out of our control. Although we know that the one surnamed Wu is a fake and have fully investigated his background, we have no choice but to sacrifice the reputation of your older sister by interacting with him to buy some more time. After all, our enemy is too strong. If they realize that they can't win against us through wits, they might use force, making us lose any chance of victory. Lady Yan's voice was filled with tiredness, revealing traces of physical and mental exhaustion in her voice. Chapter 109, A Visit. Chapter 109, A Visit. This man surnamed Wu is truly repulsive, fabricating a letter and actually using father's name to marry eldest sister, truly infuriating, Mo Kei-hyun uttered hatefully. Her despise for Wu Jianming was bone deep. Fortunately, it only mentioned your eldest sister. If the person that he had requested to marry was either you or Fengwu, I would truly not know what to do. With both of your temperaments, how could either of you possibly endure and falsely cope with this person? The only one who has to suffer is Yuju. I don't know when Lord Husband will return, and whether or not he will blame this mother, Lady Yan softly told her daughter and sighed. Mother, how could father blame you? Wasn't it eldest sister who took the initiative to socialize with the man surnamed Wu? Mo Kei-hyun immediately consoled Lady Yan. Foolish child, Yuju has no option but to do this for the sake of the fearsome Flood Dragon Association and the Mo estate. However, the most mother could do was have your eldest sister interact with that fake. There is no way I can truly marry your eldest sister to him. If we cannot delay the wedding, then we will be forced to be hostile and capture him. Lady Yan's voice grew cold as she spoke this last sentence. Once Lady Yan uttered these words, the room's atmosphere returned to a state of calm. It was clear that this mother-daughter pair knew what hostility would entail. When will father finally return? Mo Kei-hyun faintly asked a moment later. When your father left, he had said that the latest that he could return would be 5 to 6 years from then, the earliest being 2 to 3 years, Lady Yan sadly replied. However, it has been almost 10 years. I can no longer clearly remember my father's appearance, Mo Kei-hyun slowly said. Be at ease. Your father happens to be an outstanding genius of his generation. With his hidden skills, there are no problems that he can't overcome. He was definitely delayed over some important matter and will soon return to the Mo estate. Although Lady Yan was speaking to her daughter, she was trying to comfort herself as well. Oh, that's right, second sister Fengwu concocted a rejuvenating cosmetic elixir for me to give to you. Mother, why don't you try it out? I heard its effects are quite good. In order to break the room's heavy atmosphere, the girl suddenly changed the subject and started chatting about another matter. This child. Ugh. Following along with the mother-daughter pair's mundane gossip, Han Li didn't hear any other useful information. Han Li discovered from their dialogue that Lady Yan's relationship with Dr. Mo was quite intimate. It seemed that Han Li could trust her. After a moment of contemplation, Han Li felt that personally appearing and tolerating this fake young Master Wu was a better alternative by far than allowing the possibility of something insidious occurring. Nevertheless, Han Li had to first secure the precious warm Yang Jade. As he thought as such, Han Li fished out a dragon ring, one of Dr. Mo's keepsakes, from his bosom. He then quietly walked towards the room window and threw the ring into the room through an opening in the paper window covers. Dang! The clear sound of the ring falling to the ground resounded from the room. A moment later, Lady Yan's voice, neither arrogant nor humble, came from inside the room. "Who is this expert that honors my humble home with his presence? Lady Yan has not yet welcomed you. I hope you will forgive me." And Li faintly smiled and refrained from replying. He heard the girl's frightened voice. "How strange! How did this ring come from? This ring seems very familiar. It's just like the ring you wear, Mother." "Mother, come look." It was clear that Mo Keihyun had picked up the ring and handed the ring over to Lady Yan. "Dragon ring!" Lady Yan cried out in alarm. After Han Li had heard the other party recognize the keepsake, he lightly knocked twice on the door before saying in a clear voice, "Under Teacher Mo's orders, Disciple Han Li has come to pay his respects to Martial Mother." TL Martial Mother, literally, teacher's wife. After those inside the room had heard Han Li's words, there was an immediate and absolute silence. Han Li's words had clearly left them in shock for a short while. "Come in." After a moment, Lady Yan's voice invited him into the room. It was at this moment that Han Li lightly opened the room door and stepped inside. Upon entering the room, Han Li saw a beautiful, 30-year-old lady. Sitting behind her was a dainty girl around 15 to 16 years old. The girl and the beautiful woman shared a striking resemblance. With just a single glance, one could tell that they were close blood relatives. At the moment, the beautiful, married Lady Yan fiddled with the dragon ring he had just thrown into the room. Han Li's arrival had not elicited a change to her flat expression. Mo Keihyun stood behind Lady Yan and blinked her jet-black eyes, curiously sizing Han Li up. The corner of her mouth rose and revealed a smile that was not a smile. From head to toe, she released a strange, almost supernatural smell. After they had assessed Han Li, he walked forward and carried out a courtesy toward Lady Yan. "Greetings to teacher's fourth wife." Lady Yan's eyes blinked with a look of surprise. Although Han Li's appearance was not astonishing, his action was quite unexpected. However, she didn't immediately respond to Han Li's greeting. Instead, she raised her left hand, revealing her own dragon ring. Lady Yan gently brought together both rings. In front of their eyes, the two rings' dragon designs fit together, without even the slightest gap. "You are right, this keepsake is authentic. However, do you have Lord Husband's written letter on you?" Lady Yan gently asked, now revealing a few traces of a smile. As soon as Han Li heard this, he took out the letter that had been prepared long ago and handed it over to her with both hands without saying anything further. Lady Yan, seeing Han Li act respectfully towards her, nodded her head in satisfaction as she accepted the letter. Then, she unfolded it and carefully read its contents. Han Li withdrew to the side while calmly observing the expression on the face of his teacher's wife. He thought about the change in her attitude towards him as a visiting disciple and a future son-in-law. Chapter 110 Fox. Chapter 110 Fox. Han Li had already read over the contents of this letter several times. The letter was not at all complex. It merely sent word that Han Li was Dr. Mo's last disciple and that Lady Yang could place her complete trust in him. In addition, he could be used to settle any troublesome disputes the Mo estate may currently have. As long as Han Li could preserve the Mo estate's safety, Lady Yan was to choose one of Dr. Mo's 3 daughters as Han Li's bride. The letter also laid clear instructions that the dowry was to include the precious warm Yang Jade. It even went as far as to say that Dr. Mo was currently occupied with an important matter and could not return and reunite with his wives. This way, Lady Yan and his other wives wouldn't have to worry about him. TL means a master's last disciple, which implies that Han Li is Dr. Mo's successor. Although Han Li could not find anything unfavorable towards him in the letter, he was certain that the letter contained a few of Dr. Mo's tricks. Han Li knew that it was impossible for the outer writing to be so simple. However, he could not find the method to reveal the hidden message. In addition, he wished to bring this letter to the Mo estate as soon as possible. Only after gathering his courage did he deliver this letter to Lady Yan, but he was especially careful to monitor Lady Yan's each and every move at this moment. He truly wished that this fourth wife wouldn't make something out from the letter and then immediately turn hostile, demanding his arrest in order to avenge her late husband. Fortunately, the terrible scenario that Han Li imagined did not occur. After Lady Yan finished reading the letter, she simply tensely wrinkled her brow. Her face then wore an expression of great worry as she seemed to have made some difficult decisions. Huaner, go call your second mother and third mother, even your fifth mother. Tell them there is news of Lord Husband. Lady Yan turned her head and instructed Mo Kei-Huan with a resolute tone. Understood, mother, I'll go. Mo Kei-Huan knew this matter was serious, so she left obediently. However, just before she left the room, she pursed her lips and smiled towards Han Li. It seemed she was rather interested in this fellow. You are called Han Li. Lady Yan raised her head, revealing a graceful and elegant expression. That's right, fourth martial mother, Han Li sincerely replied. Could you tell me how Lord Husband accepted you as a disciple? Lady Yan asked with a smile. I will do as you ask. Han Li hesitated for a moment, but soon after, he felt that there was nothing to hide about the events that led to his acceptance as a disciple. Using a few select memories, he slowly told Lady Yan a summary of what had happened. 8 years ago, because Teacher Mo's old injury had yet to heal, he lived in seclusion at the Jing province's Seven Mysteries Sect celestial rainbow mountains. There, I had met him for the first time upon entering the mountain. Within Han Li's version of the course of events, 3/7 of it was false. The information that he could not divulge to Lady Yan was either completely revised or lightly skipped over. Even like this, however, the story had greatly captured Lady Yan's attention and interest. Han Li recounted the course of events with 3/7 being false. The information he could not divulge to Lady Yan were completely adapted or lightly skipped over. However, even like this, the story had greatly captured the attention and interest of Lady Yan. And that's how I became his disciple. Around 3 months ago, Teacher Mo was preoccupied with an important matter and was unable to spare any time to visit his family. However, he feared that he had left the Mo estate for far too long and that there would be enemies creating trouble for his wives, so he told me to leave the mountain first, come to the Mo estate to find the Teacher Mo's wives and wait for his wives' orders. What's so important that could prevent my Lord Husband from arriving home first? After Lady Yan had Han Li's adapted version of the course of events that led to his discipleship, she sighed before faintly asking this question with a trace of grief. Who is returning home? Dr. Mo has already been dead for soon to be 2 years. The corpse I buried underneath a tree is nothing but bones now. As Han Li heard this, he somewhat laughed to himself. However, with a face of humility, he replied, What matters? Teacher Mo did not tell me. However, I am certain that it is an absolutely important matter, Han Li said somewhat ambiguously. Humph, did your master command you to keep it a secret from us? Lady Yan asked with an enigmatic smile. However, the tone in her words was somewhat discontent. It is by no means like that, Han Li quickly said. He secretly bitterly smiled to himself. This Lady Yan was truly mistrustful. With an unresigned appearance, Lady Yan opened her mouth to ask a few more questions. At this moment, however, the sound of chaotic footsteps could be heard outside the room. Before the owners of the feet entered the room, a lovely and charming voice spoke. Fourth sister, I hear there is news of Lord Husband. Is this true? That devil left us 10 years ago. Does he want us sisters to become grass widows? Han Li had been distracted with this sweet voice, but soon after realizing what was said, he became startled. This great aunt is far too bold, Han Li thought, amazed. Third sister, pay more attention to your words. There is still another person in this room, a slightly rougher woman's voice said in an angry fashion. I know this already. However, I heard that that person delivering the news is Lord Husband's close disciple. It is impossible to keep up pretenses. What do you say, fifth sister? The charming voice had said, slightly happily. Impossible. Since fourth sister has called us to come, this man should at the very least be 70 to 80% trustworthy. An ice-cold voice said. That's right. Fourth sister's judgment is truly admirable, the sweet, charming voice said, giggling. It was unknown whether this was said ironically or in genuine praise for Lady Yan. After Han Li heard these words, he stole a glance at Lady Yan, who was pressing her hand against her head with a helpless expression on her face. It seemed that the owner of that lovely voice often gave her headaches. The room door finally opened, and several beautiful women entered in succession. Mokehyun followed, entering last. However, she pouted with her small red mouth, appearing somewhat melancholic. The frontmost woman was approximately 31 to 32 years old. She was tall, beautiful, and composed with delicate features, and there was a scholarly air about her. She must have been talented since a very young age. Han Li inwardly nodded his head and brought his gaze to the young woman next to her. This one appeared 23 to 24 years old. The moment Han Li saw this woman's appearance, he felt his brains buzz. For an instant, he thought he had seen a lost goddess. His entire person had sunk into her gorgeous beauty and was unable to free himself. This woman's tender, beautiful figure was unexpectedly somehow even more gorgeous than Mo Yuzhu, whom he had seen during the day. In addition, the woman's incomparable grace was something Mo Yuzhu couldn't possibly have. If one were to say there were truly fox spirits on this earth, Han Li would unconditionally be convinced, as this woman was a completed transformation. Han Li was currently swooningly dizzy. Without Han Li knowing why, a thread of cold qi from his dantian suddenly escaped and flowed along his meridians toward the center of his head. After it completed one circulation, Han Li suddenly cleared his head. After recovering his mind, Han Li was startled and didn't dare to look at this woman again. He hastily avoided her gaze. This young woman could cause the death of an entire country. With the mere look, she can turn a man's soul and spirit upside down. Does she not know that her own exceptional appearance possesses demonic power? Or is this some sort of trained seduction technique? Han Li speculated while being overwhelmed with shock. The young woman saw Han Li look at her, but apart from being somewhat infatuated, he soon regained his mind. Her eyes could not help but flash a look of surprise. Chapter 111, Beautiful Woman. Chapter 111, Beautiful Woman. Han Li quietly used his eternal spring arts to stabilize his mind before daring to even lift his head. His eyes skipped over the alluring woman and moved on to the last woman. The last wife to enter appeared to be 26 to 27 years old. Although she was a charming beauty, one look at her ice-cold face would stop anyone in his or her tracks. In addition, ever since she entered the room, her cold stare had been aimed straight at Han Li. Lady Yan saw these people come in and stood from her seat, gently greeting them. Greetings, second sister and third sister. Fifth sister has also come. Fourth sister, you are too formal. We are all of the same family. There is no need to be so polite. Without waiting for the woman in front to speak, the extremely bewitching young woman covered her almond mouth and laughed. That laugh contained an alluring charm, causing Han Li to experience a burst of desire and a shaken spirit. He was speechless without end. Little sister doesn't dare. Sisters, please take a seat. Lady Yan slightly smiled and offered her own chair to the wife in the front. She did not sit until after the wife sat. The one called fifth sister was an elegant and refined woman. She silently sat across from Lady Yan. After the married women entered, Mokehyun knowingly closed the door and moved behind her mother. Her bright full moon eyes were spinning randomly across the room. It was unknown what exactly she was thinking. This youngster is the one that delivered the message. The woman of about 30 years of age looked at Han Li and faintly asked. That's right. According to the letter he delivered, this is Lord Husband's successor. Lady Yan easily replied. Soon after, she said respectfully to Han Li, this is your second martial mother. Are you not going to pay your respects? TL note, martial mother literally, teacher's wife. Instead of second martial mother, it could be teacher's second wife and so on. I pay my respects to second martial mother. Sharp-witted, Han Li stepped forward and formally bowed to the married woman. Stand up. Since this is Lord Husband's favored disciple, there is no need to be overly polite. The married woman said with a smiling expression. This is your third martial mother and fifth martial mother. Lady Yan pointed to the abnormally gorgeous young woman and the elegant and refined woman, introducing them one by one to Han Li. Greetings to third martial mother and fifth martial mother. Han Li saw the young married women to be no more than a few years older than him. After a second of hesitation, he also bowed courteously. Han Li looked at Lady Yan with a face of doubt. She faintly smiled and said with a warm voice, your third martial mother stopped the aging of her face with a technique. Although she looks to only be of about 20 years, she is about the same age as your second martial mother. After Han Li heard this, he inwardly nodded his head, satisfied that his own guess hadn't been too far off. This alluringly beautiful young woman naturally practiced an unusual secret art. Otherwise, how else could she have captivated him with her mere appearance and rendered unable to control himself? Second sister, this is Lord Husband's handwritten letter. Please look over it. Lady Yan handed Han Li's letter to second wife Lady Li. After Lady Li finished reading it, she passed the letter to the other two wives. Once the elegant and refined young woman, the last wife to read the letter, finished looking over the several wives were stunned into completely silence. Even the seemingly frivolous and gorgeous young wife, Lady Liu, had a solemn expression on her face. Completely lacking the boldness and alluring charm she possessed a moment ago, Lady Liu was instead showing an unexpected composure. When Han Li saw the appearance of Dr. Mo's several wives, he could not help but grow uneasy. He did not know what significant information the letter had revealed to cause these wives to be so serious. However, Han Li's calm expression hadn't changed since he first entered the room, making the wives think that he was reliable and had the bearing of a general. Li, your teacher's letter has shocked us martial mothers far too greatly, so we'll need to properly talk this over. You've come here from far away, surely you must be tired. You should spend the night here at the Mo estate. Tomorrow, we will call you for questioning. Since Lady Yan had held the power of the fearsome Flood Dragon Association in her hand for several years, each and every one of her movements possessed an unspeakable dignity. Ultimately, she was the first to speak and instruct Han Li. This junior follows your orders, Han Li replied with a complete obedience. The other wives did not block Lady Yan. It seemed they also agreed to have this outsider Han Li withdraw so that they could discuss a few sensitive matters. Yuaner, bring your father's disciple Han to the rear residence and find him a clean room for him to have a proper rest, Lady Yan ordered Mo Kei-Huan. Zai, I got it. Senior disciple Han Li, follow me. Mo Kei-Huan blinked her eyes several times, slightly wrinkled her nose, and started to be somewhat unwilling. However, she immediately thought better of it and agreed with a smile across her face. You are forbidden from bothering your senior disciple, otherwise you will be punished by clan rules. Lady Yan knew the thoughts of her good-for-nothing daughter like the back of her hand, thus giving her a verbal warning in advance. All right, I understand. Pouting her face, the young girl unwillingly agreed. Han Li was speechless. If Lady Yan hadn't said anything, would this dainty young woman have played some tricks on him? Han Li looked at Mo Kei-Huan with a peculiar gaze, and for the first time, he no longer saw this girl as adorable. As a result of her mother's interference, Mo Kei-Huan dispiritedly walked out the door. Han Li followed behind with an unmoving expression. Waiting several moments after Han Li had left the room, Lady Yan broke the silence in the room with her solemn voice. Fifth sister, I'll have to inconvenience you to take a look around and see whether or not that boy has truly left or if he has secretly returned and is hiding somewhere. We're still not sure. After the elegant, refined Lady Wang heard this, she wordless left the room and disappeared into the dark. Fourth sister, you overestimated that boy. How could he possibly be so skilled? A light flashed in third wife's pretty eyes. Third sister, you've truly forgotten about one thing. A disciple of our Lord Husband can't possibly be ordinary. I believe our Mo estate is quite heavily guarded. What's more, this building is an important location where I handle the association's affairs. Not far from here, there are 20 to 30 hidden sentries densely standing guard. But even with all of our defenses, he was still able to stealthily infiltrate his place without drawing my or Kei-Huan's attention. Do you think that this is something an ordinary expert can achieve? Lady Yan quietly said. Chapter 112, Hidden Message. Chapter 112, Hidden Message. From fourth sister's argument, it appears that the youth named Han truly has some ability, second wife Li gently said, while slightly wrinkling her eyebrows. Third wife hesitated a moment before sighing and speaking her mind. There is no need to say any more. His concentration is already far greater than the fakes. I remember when that pretty boy Wu saw my face, my grand heavenly fox technique had infatuated him for an entire day before he recovered. The one named Han was initially only somewhat bewildered, but he had immediately cleared his mind afterward. It can clearly be seen that his mental energy is outstanding. He is by no means ordinary. After hearing these words, the three wives became quiet. Everyone appeared thoughtful, as if they all had something bad to say. After a moment, Lady Yan bitterly smiled and took the initiative to speak first. With such a ferocious person, it's impossible to discern whether or not he will bring fortune or disaster to our Mo estate. Take out the secret letter. Once everyone sees it, it will be clear. These words came from outside the room and were not spoken by Lady Yan, but rather by the refined, elegant fifth wife. She walked into the room. I have already inspected the surrounding area very carefully. There are no outsiders within a 200-meter radius, and the sentry guards were reinforced as well, fifth wife said expressionlessly. Lady Yan lowered her head in thought and eventually opened her mouth. You all surely remember the words Lord Husband gave before he left. After he departed, if someone delivered an unmarked letter without a hidden message, it would prove that he is safe and that we may feel at ease. However, if the letter was marked and concealed a hidden message, then it would definitely contain news that would be far from good. We must prepare ourselves mentally. As for this letter, we all saw that the letter was marked and concealed a hidden message. Regardless of how grim the news is, this is something we must face sooner or later. Let us take out and read the true letter. Third wife's voice was no longer sweet and charming, but was instead brimming with sorrow. Very well, since everyone has finished preparing themselves, we will now uncover the hidden message, Lady Yan said decisively. No longer hesitating, she grabbed a teacup and kettle from a nearby desk and proceeded to fill the cup halfway with cool water. She then grabbed her dragon-shaped ring and lightly twisted it several times, unexpectedly separating it in two and thus exposing a hidden, white medicinal powder. Lady Yan carefully poured the medicine powder into the teacup and then looked to the people at her sides. Second wife Li gazed at Lady Yan and was the first to stand. She gracefully arrived in front of the desk and raised her hand. Her pure white finger unexpectedly also wore a similar ring. Lady Li took out a small amount of medicinal powder from the ring and poured it into the teacup. However, her powder was red and seemed to differ from Lady Yan's. Third wife and fifth wife followed with similar actions. They both had dragon rings that contained a yellow and a black medicinal powder respectively. Lady Yan waited until after everyone had finished before picking up the teacup and lightly swirling it. As a result, the originally multicolored liquid actually became clear. Finished, the water has become clear. Second sister, you are the most skilled with your hands. It would be best if elder sister were to smear the paper, Lady Yan modestly said to second wife Li. After Lady Li heard this, she faintly smiled. With the letter and the medicinal water, she began to work. During this short amount of time, aside from Lady Li smearing the medicinal water on the letter's surface, there was a complete silence, causing the room's atmosphere to become more tense. It is done. The letter has been completely smeared. Next, we should have fifth sister help dry this letter with her inner strength. Lady Li straightened her body, wiping the fragrant sweat off her forehead and speaking to fifth wife with a smile. The cool, elegant young woman nodded her head and swiftly took the damp letter. She then extended her other hand, and with a slight use of force, a faint, blazing heat was emitted from her palm. She placed her palm 3 inches away from the letter and slowly dried it. After a short period of time, the letter was completely dried, and the letter's black ink had completely disappeared. In its place appeared some faint red handwriting. This was Dr. Mo's scheme to use Han Li to deliver a message to his wives, a hidden message. Han Li wasn't aware about what happened in the room after he left. At the moment, there was a little demoness standing before him that caused him to feel a large headache. While on their way, this third young Lady Mo had unexpectedly and brazenly requested a so-called first meeting gift from her senior martial brother. What kind of present would junior martial sister like? Without a better option, Han Li helplessly pinched his nose and prepared himself to satisfy her request. Any precious stones, jewelry, or perhaps something fun and interesting will do. I'm not very picky. Actually, if you don't have anything, then giving 7,000 to 8,000 taels of silver will also do. This can be regarded as your test, Mo Kei-Yuan said innocently without a trace guilt as she blinked her large dark eyes. 7,000 to 8,000 taels of silver. When Han Li heard this, he nearly fell to the floor. This little demoness was like a lioness widely opening her mouth, not the least bit fearful for her life. Taking into account everything I have on hand, I don't possess such an amount of silver. Even if I did, it would be impossible to give it to her. Does she take me for a foolish squanderer? Although Han Li thought this, his expression didn't change. However, looking at the girl's expression, there was quite a bit of meaning in her gaze. Mo Kei-Yuan was quite clever. With just a glance, she could make out some of Han Li's thoughts. She slanted her small mouth and deliberately shouted in surprise. Senior martial brother Han, you don't have a gift to commemorate your first meeting with this adorable junior martial sister. You should know that the year when I first met young Master Wu, he gave me a 10,000 silver banknotes as pocket money. The moment Han Li heard this, he grew angry. Of course, The one surnamed Wu is scheming for your family's wealth to receive twice the amount in return. I don't have the slightest intention to give you such a gift. In addition, your father planted a yin poison in me. My small life could end at any moment." Han Li was furious, but he simply looked up to the sky. Without moving, he looked at this little demoness and began wondering which item he had on hand was worth the least. Mo Kei-hyun saw this Han Li as an unsophisticated dark boy who was actually playing the fool and not saying a word. He did not take notice of her, causing her heart to be somewhat worried. Ever since last year, after she had swindled a great amount of money from young Master Wu, she dreamed of another person to take advantage of every night. Now, after all that trouble, she had another opportunity. But this guy, who seemed to be her father's true disciple, was unmoved and even had a face thicker than a city wall. How could he act so hard and indifferently toward such a cute girl as herself? He didn't have the slightest bit of sympathy. Did he not notice her practiced tears quickly flowing down her cheeks? Still remaining indifferent, he was truly infuriating. Chapter 113, Winding Fragrance Pill. Chapter 113, Winding Fragrance Pill. The air in the night skies could not have been considered cold, but Mo Kei-hyun's delicate face was slightly turning green. Both of her eyes were ruthlessly staring at Han Li. In her heart, she was silently gnashing her teeth at this thick-skinned senior apprentice brother. At the moment, both of them had been standing on this little path that wound through the back courtyard for a quarter of an hour while suffering from the cold. They did not move as much as a single step. Originally, after Mo Kei-hyun realized that Han Li was impervious to her three ultimate moves, acting cute, acting coquettishly, and using tears, she could only helplessly gnash her teeth in frustration and stop walking. She initially intended to use these moves to trap Han Li, but succeeded to no avail. Now she could only unwillingly and pitifully stare at Han Li, locking her gaze with him, hoping that her opponent would give in. But upon seeing the pitiful state Mo Kei-hyun was in, Han Li involuntarily let out a laugh. Her expressions actually reminded Han Li of his good brother Li Feiyu. Previously, whenever Li Feiyu had wanted Han Li to help him with something, he would use the exact same expression on his face, hoping to move Han Li into helping him. After some time, Han Li became completely impervious to these kinds of expressions. Thus, as Mo Kei-hyun used her best pitiful puppy look onto Han Li remained motionless, standing there while admiring Mo Kei-hyun's performance. He frequently shook his head, indicating his sarcasm. Underneath Han Li's vicious counterattack, Mo Kei-hyun was utterly defeated. She could only stop the puppy look she had been utilizing until now and exchange it with a ferocious look of rage. Actually, Mo Kei-hyun already started to regret her actions. If her mother were to find out about this, she was afraid that not only would she not be able to con anything from Han Li, but she would also taste the discipline of their clan's rules. As she thought of this, she glared hatefully at Han Li. This little bumpkin, couldn't he just give something to her? Didn't he know that girls exist to be coaxed? He was truly nothing but a country bumpkin. As of the moment, she had already forgotten about her outrageous request she had demanded earlier from Han Li. Although Han Li had no experience in coaxing girls, he knew that he would nonetheless have to borrow the strength of the Mo residents and thus could not afford to offend them. As a result, after Mo Kei-hyun's anger burned for some time, he slowly inserted his hands into his robes, trying to find a suitable trinket to appease this little demoness. Han Li finally took out a green jade bottle. Inside the bottle, there were a few flaming red pills that release an extremely strong fragrance. These pills were known as the Winding Fragrance Pills. Taken by royal concubines, this pill had no other effect other than causing the one who ingested the pill to emit a mesmerizing fragrance. Not only did this fragrance last for a long time and was pleasant to smell, but it also could provide the additional effect of protecting the user from insect bites. That was why this pill was a favorite among the royal concubines. Treating the Winding Fragrance Pill as a gift for the young girl, however, was quite a pity. Concocting this pill required a few main ingredients that were rare and precious. Even in such a prosperous place as the royal capital, the main ingredients were always found to be in short supply, unable to meet the royal court's demand. In the end, the pill had been lost with the passage of time. Han Li would never concoct such a pill that would do nothing to aid him. But during his stay in the Seven Mysteries Sect, he finally caved in and concocted some of these pills for Li Feiyu to coax Zhang Ziyuer, because he was unable to withstand Li Feiyu's urging. All he had was just one bottle with only a few pills remaining. Initially, Han Li had wanted to use these pills to cloak himself from insect bites, but now he could only use this to coax the little demoness standing before him. Han Li threw the jade bottle in the girl's direction. Mo Kei-hyun fumbled with it for a bit and finally caught the jade bottle. What is this? A smile finally broke out on Mo Kei-hyun's face. She finally received a gift from this petty man in front of her. Although this was nothing much, this was sufficient to light up a smile on Mo Kei-hyun's face. This pill is known as the Winding Fragrance Pill, and its effects are very mystical. It can. Han Li explained the pill's effects to Mo Kei-hyun, causing her to be extremely happy and satisfied. Much to Han Li's surprise, after the girl opened the jade bottle and sniffed the fragrance, she immediately closed the lid of the bottle and assumed a defensive stance. With a defending against pervert's gaze, she looked at Han Li and carefully said, "This pill is not a pill that knocks people unconscious or works as an aphrodisiac, right? Why is the fragrance so familiar to the aphrodisiacs that my sisters described? Are you planning to do something perverted to me?" After hearing this, Han Li was stunned for a prolonged period of time, becoming completely speechless. He suddenly felt like vomiting blood. This girl's thoughts were too hard to predict. To think that she actually likened the fragrance of the Winding Fragrance Pill to an aphrodisiac. Now, Han Li don't even know whether should he be impressed this lady's cautiousness or cry loudly because of an unjust accusation. Looking at your reactions, this pill seems to be authentic, but I still have to let my second sister experiment on it before I can use. After all, women have to place cautiousness above everything they do. Mo Kei-hyun told Han Li this in a righteous manner. Cough, cough, do what you will. Speechless, Han Li could only cough to mask the embarrassment on his face. He felt that it would be better for him to maintain a distance between himself and this little demoness. If he didn't, he would never know when his depression would push him to his death. However, if this pill does have all the effects you listed, I shall consider you to have passed the test. After today, if you ever require any help in the Mo residence, you can look for Kei-hyun. I will just require some small compensation, but in return, I will settle your problems for you. Mo Kei-hyun shook the bottle while happily smiling. Okay, junior apprentice sister, senior apprentice brother does have something that requires your help. Han Li recovered his former disposition as he smiled insincerely. As he replied to Mo Kei-hyun, he thought evilly in his heart, seeking assistance from you, a money grubber, in your dreams. Mo Kei-hyun naturally could not hear Han Li's inner thoughts. She felt satisfied because Han Li had acquiesced to her. All of a sudden, she felt that Han Li was pretty interesting fellow and was even quite comely to look at. Let's go, senior apprentice brother. I will find a bigger and better room for you so you don't have to suffer. Mo Kei-hyun smiled brilliantly as she led the way. Standing behind her, Han Li finally heaved a sigh of relief as he slowly followed her footsteps. Such a strange girl. He would never be together with her. Don't say that this bossy miss suddenly fell in love with an ordinary person like him. Even if she really did fall in love with him, he would straight out reject her. Just based on her unreasonable actions that were already so tough for Han Li to deal with, he could never endure it if they really got together. Han Li silently thought in his heart, decisively removing Mo Kei-hyun's name from the list of potential candidates for his wife-to-be. TL, Han Li is talking about himself in third person.